Chapter 299. Xiaoning blinked and could tell that the atmosphere between the two of them was a little off. She tugged at Ji Yaoshua's hand and smiled. "Sister Yaoshua, why are you only back now? I missed you." Ji Yaoshua rubbed Xiaoning's forehead and asked gently, "How was your stay at Azure Frost Elixir Workshop? Did anyone bully you?" Su Xiaoning froze for a moment and dodged her gaze before smiling. "No, my senior brothers and sisters have been taking care of me." Ji Yaoshua exclaimed softly. Even though Xiaoning hid it well, she still noticed some clues. Ji Yaoshua turned to Su Zimo and asked with a frown, "Zimo, what happened?" "Nothing, Sister Yaoshua. Don't ask anymore," Su Xiaoning replied hurriedly. Ji Yaoshua smiled indifferently. "Even if you and your brother don't tell me, who can hide the matters of the Great Zhou dynasty from me if I want to know? It's nothing much. There's a cultivator called Yang Yu in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop who has a grudge against you." Su Zimo did not elaborate further. Back at Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, Su Zimo had already told Yang Yu that someone would deal with her. "It's her." A cold glint flashed through Ji Yaoshua's eyes as her aura changed. "I've already warned that Yang Yu not to provoke me." It was only at this moment that one could sense the unique might and killing intent of the royal family from Ji Yaoshua. After all, the bloodline of the emperor flowed in her body, the emperor of Great Zhou who could kill 1,000,000 people in a fit of rage. Right then, a group of red dots flew over from the voids not far away at an extremely fast speed. By the looks of it, they were heading towards Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Bai Yuhan frowned. "It's the Scarlet Vulture Guards. Why are they here at this time?" Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he vaguely guessed something. Before long, dozens of Scarlet Vulture Guards arrived outside Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Their leader was bald without eyebrows. It was the commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards, Bald Vulture. Bald Vulture rode on a scarlet vulture and cupped his fists expressionlessly. "The king has ordered for the third princess to return to the palace. In addition, the king is hosting a banquet at the Rain Admiration Pavilion and invites Mr. Mo to attend." Ji Yaoshua frowned. She could see some problems in Vulture's eyes. "Commander Vulture, did Imperial Father mention why he invited Mr. Mo?" Ji Yaoshua stared into Vulture's eyes and asked loudly. Vulture bowed slightly, avoiding Ji Yaoshua's gaze, and said, "I don't know." Ji Yaoshua's heart sank. She grew up in the palace and knew everything about it. She could sense a faint killing intent from Bald Vulture. This murderous intent was definitely not directed at her. It goes without saying who it was directed at. "Don't go." Ji Yaoshua turned around with a grim expression and shook her head at Su Zimo. Su Zimo smiled indifferently. Actually, he had expected this day to come. More than a month ago, when he met Su Xiaoning in the capital, he had already guessed that given the emperor's intentions, he would find out about his true identity sooner or later. Furthermore, there was no way he could hide his identity during the sect competition. Su Zimo had never thought of hiding it either. Now that the emperor was hosting a banquet and the Scarlet Vulture Guards had appeared, it was basically certain that his identity was exposed. This was clearly a hangmen banquet. However, Su Zimo had no choice but to go. This was the capital of Great Zhou and he had no other choice. "I'll accompany you." Ji Yaoshua also realized that even if Su Zimo refused to go, the Scarlet Vulture Guards would forcefully bring him over. At that time the situation might be even worse. "Stay here and wait for me to return. Don't worry." Su Zimo turned around and instructed Nian Qi and Xiaoning before glancing at Night Spirit who was sprawled in a corner. "Let's go." Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan each sat on a Scarlet Vulture and sped towards the palace under Bald Vulture's lead. A moment later, everyone arrived at the palace. Flying was prohibited in the palace and everyone leaped down from the Scarlet Vultures. Bald Vulture bowed. "Third princess, please return. I'll bring Mr. Mo to the banquet right away." "I'll go too." Although Ji Yaoshua's tone was calm, it was unquestionable. Bald Vulture frowned and said in a deep voice, "Third princess, please don't make things difficult for me. I'm only following orders." "Oh," Ji Yaoshua asked indifferently, "do you have a problem with me making things difficult for you?" Bald Vulture's heart skipped a beat as he replied hurriedly, "I wouldn't dare." Ji Yaoshua turned around with a sharp gaze and a domineering aura. She questioned, "Your orders are to bring Mr. Mo over. Does my following conflict with your mission? This bald vulture was speechless. In the palace of Great Zhou, Ji Yaoshua seemed to have turned into a different person, exuding the dominance and might unique to the royal family with a sharp edge. Ji Yaoshua asked again, I've just returned from Azure Frost sect and haven't had a meal with father for a long time. Today he's holding a banquet and I want to join him for a meal. Are you going to stop me? I wouldn't dare. Ji Yaoshua's 3 consecutive questions had Bald Vulture breaking out in cold sweat. Ji Yaoshua waved it off. Lead the way. Yes. Bald Vulture hesitated for a moment and glared at Su Zimo with a dark gaze before lowering his head reluctantly. Everyone headed towards the Rain Admiration Pavilion. Before long, they arrived at the entrance of the Rain Admiration Pavilion. On the small path between the pools, Imperial Army soldiers stood guard on both sides with cold expressions. They wielded long sabers and axes and exuded a faint stench of blood. These were Imperial Army soldiers that had truly experienced the baptism of blood on the battlefield. The Imperial Army soldiers were all at perfected foundation establishment and were even stronger than Su Zimo. As for how many meridians they had unlocked, the spirit-peering art could not tell. The other Scarlet Vulture guards remained outside. Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshua, Bald Vulture and Bai Yuhan passed through the Imperial Army and entered the Rain Admiration Pavilion. The moment he entered, Su Zimo felt a murderous aura. There was a circle of cultivators around the Rain Admiration Pavilion. All of them were at Jin Dan realm and they glared at Su Zimo expressionlessly with cold gazes. In the middle of the Rain Admiration Pavilion, there was a table with plates of exquisite dishes that were still steaming. On the seat facing the door sat an indescribably noble middle-aged man in the robes of the emperor. His forehead was broad and his gaze was deep. His expression was calm and one could not tell if he was happy or angry. The Emperor of Great Zhou. The Emperor's gaze was fixed on Su Zimo's face for a long time, as though he was scrutinizing and trying to figure out who this green-robed scholar before him was. The Emperor's gaze was sharp as a knife. Coupled with the fact that he had been on the throne for a long time, there was naturally a dignity in his gaze that looked down on the masses. Even cultivators would not dare to meet his gaze. However, Su Zimo had a calm expression and met the Emperor's gaze without any intention of avoiding. Prior to this, Su Zimo might have been a little guilty. However, in the past 3 years, Su Zimo's reputation in the capital of Great Zhou with the name of Mo Ling had grown and accumulated his influence. Coupled with the fact that Su Zimo was someone with a sharp edge to begin with, the Emperor's dignity could not suppress him. Chapter 300. The Emperor retracted his gaze from Su Zimo and just now, the pressure disappeared instantly, as though everything was just an illusion. Schwerer, come here. The Emperor turned his head slightly and looked at Ji Yaoshua, smiling as he beckoned with his hand. Ji Yaoshua frowned slightly and did not move. The Emperor asked with a smile, why? You don't want to eat with me? At that moment the Emperor had a benevolent expression as he looked at Ji Yaoshua with a doting gaze. He looked like a slightly older father. Even though he could not sense any killing intent or hostility from the Emperor, Su Zimo's spirit perception told him that this person was extremely dangerous. Furthermore, he was on the brink of death. Ji Yaoshua had a hesitant expression. After a moment of hesitation, she walked over slowly and sat beside the Emperor. Father, Mr. Mo is. Let's eat. Before Ji Yaoshua could finish, she was interrupted by the Emperor. His tone was calm but no one could refute him. With that said, the Emperor ate the dishes on the table as though no one was around. He ate elegantly and slowly without making any sound. At that moment, even Ji Yaoshua could not figure out the Emperor's thoughts. Ji Yaoshua glanced at Su Zimo and felt uneasy. Even though she was eating symbolically, it tasted like wax. Su Zimo seemed to have become an extra person in the Rain Admiration Pavilion. It was as though the Emperor had forgotten about him and left him on the spot. Su Zimo smiled indifferently and was not annoyed. With one hand behind his back, he strolled to the side and looked at the beautiful scenery outside in a relaxed manner. Time passed bit by bit and the Rain Admiration Pavilion was silent. Su Zimo seemed to be completely immersed in the beautiful scenery and had forgotten everything around him. At that moment, Bai Yuhan nodded secretly with a look of admiration. Not everyone could maintain such a calm demeanor in front of the emperor of the great Zhou dynasty. A long time later, the emperor wiped his mouth as a shuddering cold glint flashed in his eyes. Ji Yaoshua put down his bowl and chopsticks. He coughed lightly and said, "Let's go." Ji Yaoshua's words were partly to summon the maids to remove the dishes, and partly to remind Su Zimo. Su Zimo gradually regained his senses and returned to a spot not far away from the emperor. "Should I call you Mr. Imo or Su Zimo?" The emperor suddenly spoke and asked straightforwardly without any concealment. Su Zimo said, "Either one is fine. It all depends on your majesty." Bang! The emperor's palm suddenly slammed down heavily on the table with a loud bang. Ji Yaoshua was shocked. "Su Zimo, do you know your crime?" The emperor slammed the table and stood up. Suddenly his aura changed and he was like an enraged lion, exuding a massive might that swept over like a tidal wave. These words were like a great bell, deafening to the ears. Su Zimo's figure swayed. Under the emperor's might, Su Zimo felt as though he was suffocating and could be beheaded at any moment. "Father!" Ji Yaoshua's expression changed as she stood up hurriedly. "Don't interfere in this matter." Without even looking, the emperor waved his sleeves gently and sent Ji Yaoshua to the side. It was unknown what sort of dermic art was used, but Ji Yaoshua could not move at all. However, she was agitated and her eyes were filled with endless worry, unable to speak. Su Zimo closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, they were sparkling and shimmering. "What crime have I committed?" Su Zimo asked instead. The emperor's gaze was dark as he said slowly, "You hid your identity in front of me. That's a grave crime of deceiving the emperor and deserves to be beheaded." Everyone in the Rain Admiration Pavilion could sense the emperor's killing intent. However, Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he replied calmly, "Your Majesty has never asked me about the matter of hiding. How can you talk about that?" "Nonsense!" The emperor shouted. "Back then at Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop, I asked you personally which sect you were from and who your master was. How dare you quibble now that things have come to this?" Su Zimo replied indifferently, "Your Majesty, you were incognito the other day. How would I know your identity? There's naturally no way to talk about the matter of hiding." The emperor frowned slightly. The meaning behind Su Zimo's words was simple. The source of this matter was not him, but the emperor. Right from the beginning, the emperor had never asked about Su Zimo's background in his capacity as the emperor. As such, the latter naturally could not be considered as deceiving the emperor. No matter what, Su Zimo had saved Ji Yaoshua's life before. Furthermore, Su Zimo's other identity was Mr. Imo, who was famous throughout the capital. Logically speaking, the emperor should not have killed Su Zimo. However, the moment the emperor found out about the truth, he felt a sense of shame as though he had been deceived. He was indignant about letting Su Zimo leave just like that. He wanted to kill him, but at the same time he did not want to kill him. The emperor's inner conflict was at its peak. Therefore, if he wanted to kill Su Zimo, he had to find a reason that could convince him. Right from the start, when Su Zimo stepped into the Rain Admiration Pavilion, his spirit perception had sensed an intense danger. That was because the emperor had already intended to kill him, and was merely lacking a reason. Therefore, the emperor left Su Zimo where he was. As long as Su Zimo did not deal with it properly, the emperor would strike immediately and kill him on the spot. Under normal circumstances, someone at Su Zimo's age would be the most impetuous. Coupled with the fact that he was the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty, he would definitely be enraged to be ignored as such. He would either step forward to reason with the emperor or leave in a huff. Regardless of the choice, Su Zimo would definitely die. However, he was neither angry nor frustrated. He walked to the side calmly and looked at the scenery outside. Helpless, the emperor could only make things difficult for him once more and pin down the crime of deceiving the emperor as a reason to kill Su Zimo. However, Su Zimo resolved it with just a few words, leaving the emperor with no reason to refute. Although it seemed like a verbal exchange, there were sabers and swords behind it. Any mistake in Su Zimo would stain the Rain Admiration Pavilion with blood. Ji Yaoshua, who had seen through everything, heaved a sigh of relief and her expression relaxed. "Very good." The emperor nodded expressionlessly. His tone was cold and one could not tell if it was praise or mockery. Let's put aside the matter of deceiving the emperor first. The emperor's gaze was cold as he asked coldly, "Do you admit to killing the imperial army guard, Dai Su?" Actually, as long as this matter was investigated carefully, Su Zimo would definitely be implicated. Back then, Dai Su caught sight of Su Zimo's figure outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion and followed him. That night he died. It was obvious who the murderer was. Su Zimo pondered for a moment before nodding. "I was the one who killed him." "All right," the emperor shouted with a cold glint in his eyes. "Since you admit to it, there's nothing more to say. A life for a life." Su Zimo raised his head and looked at the emperor, asking instead, "Dai Su wanted to kill me. Why can't I kill him?" "As long as someone wants to kill you, you'll retaliate?" The emperor raised his brow. "Yes." Su Zimo did not hesitate. Suddenly, the emperor narrowed his eyes and asked slowly, "If I want to kill you now, what do you want?" When she heard that question, Ji Yaoshua shuddered. That was an unsolvable question. No matter how Su Zimo answered, it would be wrong. If Su Zimo showed weakness and did not dare to retaliate, he would have to renege on what he said just now and the emperor could go with the flow to kill him. If Su Zimo's attitude was firm and he dared to retaliate and kill the emperor, that would be regicide and he would definitely die. It was an unsolvable situation. Chapter 301. Now that I want to kill you, what do you want? The emperor's question was like a sharp sword that pierced over, sealing off all of Su Zimo's escape routes. His killing intent rumbled and was almost corporeal. Shrouded by that killing intent, Su Zimo could not move at all. The Rain Admiration Pavilion was eerily silent. Even Bai Yuhan, who was standing at the side, felt her heart skip a beat, let alone Su Zimo, who was at the heart of the storm. The emperor's cultivation was unfathomable to begin with. Coupled with the emperor's unique aura, how could any ordinary person withstand such pressure? If it was perfected Jin Dan, he would have knelt on the ground in fear as well. However, Su Zimo stood there magnanimously with a straight back, neither servile nor overbearing. "You want to kill me?" Su Zimo finally spoke and paused for a moment. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. Ji Yaoshua could vaguely sense something and was so anxious that she was on the verge of tears. Su Zimo raised his head with a deep gaze that emitted a demonic glint. Looking back, he said slowly, "Since you want to kill me, I'll kill you first. What are you guys doing?" Before he could finish his sentence, a gentle voice sounded from outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion. It was soft and pleasant, interrupting Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. That voice sounded familiar. Everyone turned towards the source of the voice. A young girl in a pale pink dress stood gracefully with her head tilted. Her oval face was innocent as she looked at the Rain Admiration Pavilion curiously with a pure gaze. When he saw the young girl, the killing intent in the emperor's eyes vanished instantly. Although he was still suppressing Su Zimo with his aura, his gaze turned gentle, as though he was afraid of scaring the young girl. "Yin, why are you here?" The emperor's tone was reproachful and doting. The girl in pink said coquettishly, "I heard that sister is back. I missed her, so I came to take a look." Sister, why are you crying and standing there motionless?" The girl in pink walked into the Rain Admiration Pavilion and saw the sobbing Ji Yaoshua beside her. She frowned in confusion and asked innocently. Without batting an eyelid, the emperor released an invisible energy wave from his glabella, removing the restraints on Ji Yaoshua. The emperor said in a deep voice, "Shuer, leave this place with Yen first." "I'm not leaving." With tears in her eyes, Ji Yaoshua looked at the emperor stubbornly and shook her head resolutely. "Ah!" Right then the girl in pink suddenly exclaimed. She covered her cherry lips and looked at Su Zimo in disbelief. Her eyes were filled with surprise. "Su, young Master Su, it's you?" The girl in pink ran to Su Zimo's side with an agitated look on her face. She grabbed his arm tightly and refused to let go, as though she was afraid that he would disappear before her eyes the next moment. Dumbfounded. Apart from Su Zimo, everyone in the Rain Admiration Pavilion was stunned on the spot, watching everything with dumbfounded expressions. The emperor was stunned as well and instinctively removed the pressure on Su Zimo, afraid that he would accidentally injure the girl in pink. Su Zimo was still rather calm. The moment the girl in pink entered, he had already recognized her. She was the demoness of the fiend sex pure maiden sect, Demoness G. However, the Demoness G before him looked innocent and charming. Her eyes were clear, like a young girl who was uninvolved in the affairs of the world. If not for the fact that both of them looked identical, Suzimo would not have dared to confirm it. However, on second thought, Suzimo realized that Demoness G did indeed possess such capabilities. Whether it was naive, charming, dignified and elegant, or delicate and pitiful, she could play them all with ease without any flaws. It was as though there were countless split personalities, hidden within Demoness G's body that she could switch between at will. Suzimo did not reply. He did not know what Demoness G was up to. Young Master Su, I've been looking for you painstakingly. To think that you would be here. Demoness G tugged at Suzimo's sleeves and pouted her pink lips, saying in an aggrieved manner, Yen are you? Pausing for a moment, the Emperor pointed at Suzimo with a strange expression and asked, You know this person? I don't. Demoness G shook her head. I only know that his surname is Su and I don't know his name. However, young Master Su has saved my life before. The Emperor's mouth opened slightly, dumbfounded. His expression froze on his face and his mind was in a mess. The Imperial Army, Bald Vulture, Bai Yuhan and the others at the side lost their composure as their eyes widened and their jaws nearly dropped to the ground. What was up with Suzimo? The Emperor only had 2 daughters and he had saved both of them before? Was this man born to save princesses? Ji Yaoshua was a little confused as well as she blinked her watery eyes at everything before her. Suzimo had even saved her sister before? The Emperor coughed gently and regained his composure, asking with a frown, Yener, what's going on? When did he save you? In Chiyu City. Demoness G replied, 3 years ago. I went to Chiyu City with Auntie Gu to play. There was once when I snuck out while Auntie Gu wasn't around. To think that I would have met 6 bad guys. If young Master Su hadn't appeared, I would have been doomed. With that said, Demoness G seemed to have a lingering fear as she vomited. Her words were half true and half false. If not for the fact that Suzimo had experienced it personally, he would not have suspected it. Furthermore, judging from the Emperor and Ji Yaoshua's expressions, Suzimo realized that the 2 of them did not know about Demoness G's sect at all. This child. The Emperor shook his head exasperatedly. Demoness G continued, later on, I chased after young Master Su to ask about his residence and background so that you could reward him heavily. However, young Master Su left straight away and I couldn't find him even after searching for a long time. I've got it. Demoness G revealed a look of realization and clapped with a smile. Father, did you find young Master Su specifically to reward him after knowing about this? The Emperor remained silent and smiled bitterly internally. Be it Suzimo deceiving the Emperor or killing the Imperial Army, this man had saved his 2 daughters at the end of the day. Initially, the Emperor's attitude towards Suzimo was already complicated, and he was not resolute in killing the latter. Now that this matter had happened, the Emperor had completely given up on killing Suzimo. However, he was worried about something else. The Emperor's gaze shifted between his 2 daughters and Suzimo's group of 3 as he sighed internally. After pondering for a moment, the Emperor said in a deep voice, Yener, I have something else to discuss with Suzimo. It's been a long time since you've seen your sister. The 2 of you should head out first. But what about him? It wasn't easy for me to meet young Master Su. I can't let him escape again. Demoness G pouted and wrapped her arms around Suzimo's arms, hugging him tightly. The 2 soft arms squeezed with a hint of warmth and elasticity, causing Suzimo's body to stiffen. The Emperor said helplessly, Don't worry. I'll let him go after speaking to him for a while. Thank you, Father. Demoness G smiled sweetly and walked to the side with a gentle voice. Holding Ji Yaoshua's petite hand, she smiled. Let's go, sister. Let's wait outside. Yes. Ji Yaoshua nodded. Since the Emperor was willing to say that, Suzimo's life was naturally not in danger and Ji Yaoshua was finally relieved. The 2 sisters left the Rain Admiration Pavilion hand in hand. Chapter 302. All of you can leave as well. After Ji Yaoshua and her sister left the Rain Admiration Pavilion, the Emperor waved his hand. Bald Vulture, Bai Yuhan and the Imperial Army guards bowed and left as well, leaving only the Emperor and Suzimo in the pavilion. Aren't you unable to cultivate because you don't have a spirit root? There were some opportunities that happened by accident. Who taught you those skills? I'm a disciple of Misty Peak. Misty Peak. Very good. That's rare. The emperor nodded. Although Misty Peak was one of the 5 major sects, there were almost no amazing disciples in terms of weapon refinement. If Su Zimo had not admitted it personally, the emperor would not have thought that the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou was from Misty Peak. Su Zimo emoling fufu. The emperor laughed and said in a self-deprecating manner, to think that the cripple in my heart would be able to stir up so much trouble right under my nose and achieve such great accomplishments. To be fair, Su Zimo's current reputation in the capital was partly due to his own capabilities in weapon refinement. However, half of it was due to the emperor as well. In fact, Su Zimo's true fame only spread after the emperor's announcement. At that moment, Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop trampled on True Fire Weapon Workshop completely. Furthermore, all the cultivators in the capital knew that the Emperor of Great Zhou was backing Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop. Anyone who dared to target Mo Ling would be challenging the Emperor's authority. After that, the reason why Su Zimo was able to leave unscathed after killing someone on the streets was also because he had the Emperor's protection. Therefore, the reason why the Emperor wanted to kill Su Zimo was not only because he was enraged after learning the truth, but also because he felt like he was being used and deceived. As the Emperor, it was easy to imagine how enraged he was at the time when he was toyed with by a cripple in his heart. However, no matter what, Su Zimo had saved both of his daughters. The Emperor's killing intent gradually dissipated as well. Instead, he felt a little emotional. Under such pressure, this young man in his 20s was still able to maintain his composure, and even had a hint of a sharp counterattack. It was truly rare. Throwing away his initial prejudices, the Emperor admired Su Zimo. However, behind this admiration, the Emperor had more concerns. On the one hand, he was worried that Su Zimo was too close to the 2 princesses and might have other plans. On the other hand, looking at Xue Er and Yan Er's expressions, they seemed to have a good impression of Su Zimo. How should he choose? He couldn't possibly give both of them to this brat as Dao companions. How could there be such a good thing in this world? The Emperor asked, what happened in Chiyu City back then? Who were the 6 people who attacked Yan? I don't know. Su Zimo shook his head and said, at that time I happened to come across her by chance, so I saved Ji Yao. Miss Ji. Since Demoness Ji chose to hide it, Su Zimo naturally could not reveal the truth. The Emperor nodded and asked in a seemingly casual manner, there are no outsiders here. Tell me, how do you feel about Xue Er and Yan Er? Su Zimo replied, the 3rd princess has helped me and the Su family before. I view her as a benefactor and a close friend. As for the little princess, I'm not familiar with her either. We've only met by chance. One was a close friend and the other was not? The Emperor could sense that Su Zimo was speaking the truth. In other words, his 2 initial concerns were gone. Instead, Su Zimo's attitude made the Emperor indignant. Both of his daughters were beautiful and of noble birth. How could they not be compatible with Su Zimo? Yet, he had no other intentions? Your Majesty, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Su Zimo cupped his fists. The Emperor pondered for a moment and said slowly, the plan of inviting you to be the judge for the weapon refinement segment for the sect competition remains unchanged. That statement meant that the Emperor was no longer prejudiced against Su Zimo, and tacitly acknowledged all of his achievements. Su Zimo nodded and bade farewell. Looking at Su Zimo's departing back view, the Emperor smiled gently and lamented, thankfully, Misty Peak has produced someone like him who can win back some points in weapon refinement. Otherwise, Misty Peak would have been utterly humiliated in this sect competition. Pausing for a moment, the Emperor shook his head and muttered to himself, speaking of which, apart from weapon refinement, Misty Peak is no longer able to fight for the other 3 rankings. Yan Er, what's going on in Chiyu City? How did Zimo save your life? Tell me. Outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion, Ji Yaoshua asked curiously. Blinking, she looked around and pulled Ji Yaoshua to a corner. Seeing that there was no one around, she whispered, Sister, I made that up. I don't know any young Master Su at all. Ah! Ji Yaoshua was stunned. She covered her mouth and chuckled. I only came to help you because I heard that father was enraged. He couldn't tell at all. You. Ji Yaoshua tapped her fair and delicate forehead and smiled helplessly. It's not only father. I took it seriously as well. Pausing for a moment, Ji Yaoshua retracted her smile and sighed. However, if you hadn't appeared, Zimo might have truly been doomed. This Su Zimo is the man of your dreams, sister. She blinked and asked. Ji Yaoshua blushed and spat softly. Don't spout nonsense. He must be. Lass, you're asking for a beating. As the two of them bickered, Su Zimo had already walked out of the Rain Admiration Pavilion and was heading over. When he arrived, Su Zimo cupped his fists. Thank you, princesses. Hey young Master Su, my name is Jan. Remember that I helped you before. You must thank me if you get the chance. After saying that, she winked at Su Zimo with a bewitching smile while Ji Yaoshua was not paying attention. Her smile was like a flower that could bewitch everyone. Her eyes were like water that could steal souls. Su Zimo closed his eyes hurriedly and gasped for air as he felt a surge of heat in his body. This was the demoness of pure maiden sect. Ji Yaoshua was a little surprised as she glanced at Su Zimo before turning to look at Demoness Ji. At that moment, Demoness Ji had already returned to normal. That bewitching smile and teasing gaze disappeared in a flash, as though it was just an illusion. Demoness Ji waved goodbye. Ji Yaoshua looked at her back view and said to Su Zimo, You've really got to thank Yen-er. She doesn't know you at all and made up a lie to deceive father. Yen-er is inexperienced and pure. How would she know how to lie? It's really been hard on her this time round. Ji Yaoshua sighed softly once more. Su Zimo was speechless and lamented internally. If your sister doesn't know how to lie and is pure and kind, then everyone in this world is honest. However, Su Zimo could not say those words out loud. After all, he had promised Demoness Ji to help her hide her identity. Furthermore, given the state of Ji Yaoshua and the Emperor, even if Su Zimo told them that their sister and daughter were the demonesses of the Fiend Sect's pure maiden sect, they would not believe him at all. What does your sister usually do? Su Zimo asked in a seemingly casual manner. Ji Yaoshua shook her head. Yen-er can't cultivate and has been learning business from Auntie Gu. Sometimes she runs around. Su Zimo did not know what sort of cultivation technique she was cultivating that concealed her cultivation realm and made her look like a mortal. However, it was true that she did not have to kill personally for her lineage. It was all about getting someone else to do the dirty work. A single gaze was enough. Chapter 303. The capital of Great Zhou was getting livelier. In the last few days, most of the sects in the territory of Great Zhou had arrived. Under the lead of Array Peak's master, Xianyi and Talisman Peak's master, Lu Hui, the group from Misty Peak had also arrived in the capital. Apart from the two perfected Jin Dan, Misty Peak had less than 10 disciples. Look, that seems to be a Misty Peak disciple. To think that they only brought so few people. It's good enough that they're here. I heard that after the battle at Dongling Valley, Misty Peak suffered a huge blow, and almost all their foundation establishment disciples died. Yes, they're probably just here to join in the fun. Misty Peak has almost nothing to do with the competition for the 4 ranking lists. Xianyi and Lu Hui were expressionless as they walked on the long street and vaguely heard the discussions around them. However, the disciples behind the two of them all revealed indignant expressions. Those people are really spouting nonsense. Senior brother Ji is at 5 Meridian Foundation establishment and will definitely get a spot on the spirit ranking. The person who spoke was round like a ball. It was none other than Misty Peak's little fatty. The senior brother Ji that little fatty was referring to wore a gray robe and had long limbs. His name was Ji Chengtian. Ji Chengtian was one of the 3 legacy disciples of Misty Peak to begin with, and was also the only one who survived the battle at Dongling Valley. 3 years ago, Ji Chengtian was only at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. 3 years later, Ji Chengtian's cultivation realm was already at 5 Meridian Foundation establishment, and he was the strongest among the inner sect disciples. When Ji Chengtian heard little fatty's words, he smiled bitterly and his eyes dimmed. Qin Yu, who was initially hailed as the number 1 of the inner sect disciples and had a chance of breaking through to 6 Meridian Foundation establishment before the sect competition, had already died at Dongling Valley. Right now, other than him, the strongest person in Misty Peak was at 3 Meridian Foundation establishment. In fact, There weren't even any disciples at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment in the sect. In other words, other than him, the chances of getting a spot on the spirit ranking were extremely slim for the sect competition this time round. There was still some hope for Misty Peak on the talisman board. Lung Ro's attainments in talismans were extremely profound, and she had become the strongest person in the Tao of Talismans among the inner court disciples. As for alchemy and artifact forging, although the sects had each sent a disciple over, they were only participating for a while. It was impossible for them to leave their names on the pill and artifact rankings. Shui said softly, actually, if Junior Brother Su was still alive with his abilities, he would definitely be able to leave his name on the artifact board. Upon hearing the words Junior Brother Su, everyone from Misty Peak fell silent and sighed. The 2 perfected Jin Dan, Xianyi and Lu Hui also shook their heads in pity. Ji Chengtian and the others had mixed feelings about Su Zimo. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had killed the young master of Blood Crow Palace and sacrificed himself to lure away more than half of the cultivators of Blood Crow Palace in the battle 3 years ago, causing the other party to panic, all of them would have died in Dongling Valley. Lung Ro lowered her gaze with a cold expression. However, there was a hint of sorrow in the depths of her eyes. Everyone, get your spirits up. Xianyi hollered, Shui, the reason why you're here is partly to participate in the sect competition. However, more importantly, you're here to witness the glory of the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou. That's right. Talisman Peak's master, Lu Hui, nodded. I heard that, Mr. Mo will appear in the sect competition as one of the judges for the weapon refinement segment. If you can comprehend a thing or two from Mr. Mo's comments, it will be equivalent to 10 years of hard work. Yes. Shui nodded solemnly. Many weapon refinement masters in the territory of Great Zhou had an almost blind reverence for Mo Ling, and it was the same for Shui. In his opinion, Mo Ling's rise was like a miracle that left one in awe. Throughout history, there had never been a weapon refinement master who could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons like Mo Ling. Every weapon refinement master wanted to witness for themselves what the legendary Mo clan's spirit gathering technique was like. On this day, the morning sun had just risen and the capital was already bustling with activity. There were more than 1,000 sects of various sizes and even more cultivators under them. At a glance, there was a sea of people densely packed, forming waves of people in the long streets and alleys as they surged towards the southwest corner of the capital. Today was the day of the sect competition. Everyone was watching. The location of the sect competition was always at the southwest corner of the capital. There was a huge empty field there that could easily accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. The Scarlet Vulture Guards, Azure Falcon Guards and White Hawk Guards were all mobilized. Each of them rode on spirit beasts and traveled in midair, maintaining the discipline of the streets. Apart from itinerant cultivators, most of the sects were led by perfected Jin Dan. In the middle of the square there was a square sunken area. The cultivators participating in the sect competition would concoct pills, refine tools, and create talismans in this sunken area to determine the final winner. In the 4 corners of the sunken area, there were 4 gigantic jade pillars that were as white as ivory and shone with a mysterious luster. The 4 jade pillars represented spirit, talisman, elixir and weapon respectively. They were the 4 rankings of the sect competition. There were 10 spots on each jade pillar. In other words, after the sect competition ended, 40 names would appear on the 4 jade pillars. They would be the final victors of the sect competition. The sunken area was squarish and had 4 sides. 3 of them were spectator areas for the Foundation establishment cultivators of the various sects to watch the sect competition. The last area was covered with a golden carpet. Walking up the stairs at the end of the 999 steps, there was a supreme and noble throne. That was the seat of the Emperor of Great Zhou. On both sides of the golden carpet, there were a few rows of chairs and tables that were filled with spirit fruits, immortal peaches and nectar that emitted a fragrant aroma. Those seats were prepared for the perfected Jin Dan of the various sections. As a perfected Jin Dan, it was impossible for them to squeeze together like Foundation establishment cultivators and watch from the side of the sunken area. Of course, the closer one was to the Emperor of Great Zhou's seat. The more famous and strong a perfected Jin Dan was, the greater the faction backing them. Most of the seats at the end were itinerant cultivators. Although they were also at the Jin Dan realm, They were weak and were purely here to join in the fun and broaden their horizons. The three commanders of the capital guards, Bald Vulture, the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan, guarded the end of the golden carpet. Any perfected Jin Dan that wanted to take a seat would have to go through the three of them. The three of them weighed the pros and cons before making the appropriate arrangements. When everyone from Misty Peak arrived at the sunken area, Xianyi turned around and said in a deep voice, "Don't feel pressured for this sect competition. Just do your best." "Yes," Little Fatty and the others replied. Although they agreed readily, every single Misty Peak disciple revealed a hint of nervousness on their faces. The scene this time round was way too grand and cultivators were arriving endlessly. The number of cultivators around the sunken area was increasing. Xianyi and Lu Hui exchanged glances and could see the helplessness and worry in each other's eyes. The disciples were already showing signs of fear before the battle even started. They were leaderless. The Battle of Dongling Valley had dealt a huge blow to Misty Peak. Although they had a 5-Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator like Ji Chengtian, he lacked decisiveness and dominance. He did not have the confidence of a fearless individual. If he was still alive, perhaps things would be different. Scenes flashed through Xianyi's mind. It was a green-robed cultivator with delicate features. Despite his young age, he was calm and composed. Elixir refinement, weapon refinement, 10 Formations Pagoda Challenge, defeated strong foes, and was number 1 of the 4 peaks. Chapter 304. The spectator area on both sides of the golden carpet was already filled with perfected beings Jin Dan. Xianyi and Lu Hui gave a few more instructions before passing through the sunken area and heading towards the spectator area. When they arrived, Xianyi and Lu Hui passed their sect badges to the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan respectively. Xianyi had been to the sect competition more than once and was acquainted with the 3 commanders. However, he still had to do a symbolic check. The Bearded Man asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Wenxian, you didn't come this time round?" When he heard that, Xianyi's expression darkened as he shook his head gently. A look of sadness and anger flashed through Lu Hui's eyes as well. The Bearded Man pondered for a moment and roughly guessed the truth. In the Battle of Dongling Valley, it was said that Misty Peak suffered heavy casualties and a few perfected beings Jin Dan died as well, leaving only one who managed to escape with severe injuries. Judging from Xianyi and Lu Hui's expressions, Wenxian was most likely dead. Xianyi forced a smile. 3 years ago, Misty Peak was ambushed and our sect disciples suffered heavy casualties. We didn't bring many people this time round so that they could broaden their horizons. As for the 4 ranking spots, we don't have any hopes of fighting for them. The Bearded Man shook his head and said hurriedly, "Fellow Taoist, you're too humble. How can any Misty Peak disciple dare to underestimate you? Even if there's only one of you, you can crush all the paragons." "That's right." Bai Yuhan smiled as well. "Congratulations, Misty Peak is going to be famous once more." Xianyi and Lu Hui were stunned. Both of them thought that the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan were being sarcastic and mocking Misty Peak. In previous sect competitions, Misty Peak could take at least 3 of the 10 spots on the spirit ranking alone. At most, they could even take up half of the spirit ranking. But now, there were a total of 40 spots on the 4 ranking lists for this sect competition, and Misty Peak could only take up 2 spots at most. It would be a miracle if they did not embarrass the sect, let alone become famous. Lu Hui harumphed coldly with a displeased expression. Xianyi frowned in confusion. The way he looked at the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan did not look like he was mocking them. Just now, his tone sounded sincere, as though he was referring to something else. "The 2 of you please come in." The curly Bearded Man nodded with a smile and added, "There were other Jin Dan perfected persons queuing up behind the 2 of them. Xianyi did not want to stay here any longer. He could only sit in the spectator seats with a hint of doubt. Look, the first seat has already gone over. Next to the sunken area, Little Fatty pointed to the distant spectator seats and said, "The seats of the 2 chiefs are quite good. They are very close to the throne." The spectator stands could be divided into several areas. There was only 1 seat in the first area, and that was the Emperor's throne. Below the Son of Heaven's throne, there weren't many seats in the second region. Right now they were all empty and no one was seated. The third area was occupied by Xianyi, Lu Hui, and the others. Apart from the two of them, the perfected Jean Dan of Iridescent Clouds Palace, True Fire Sect, Southern Mountains Sect and Azure Frost Sect were already seated. Next was the fourth area, where the perfected Jean Dan of the other sects of the Great Zhou dynasty were seated. It had the most seats and the largest area. The fifth area was for the itinerant cultivators of Jean Dan realm. How ignorant! Even if perfected Jean Dan of Misty Peak is seated in the third area, what can that prove? Right then a cold sneer sounded from the side filled with mockery. Another sarcastic voice sounded. In my opinion, Misty Peak is going to be removed from the 5 major sects after this sect competition. Little Fatty and the others frowned and looked over. The two people who spoke were disciples of True Fire Sect standing at the side. As one of the 5 major sects, True Fire Sect had more than 100 foundation establishment cultivators. Of the two people in the lead, one of them was a man with a chiseled face, a high nose bridge and thin lips. He exuded a cold and ruthless aura. The other person wore a red robe and had a haughty expression. True Fire Sect doesn't have the final say on whether or not we're going to be removed. Take care of yourselves. Shui retorted angrily. The man in the red robe turned around and scanned Shui, asking with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, you seem indignant? You're only at mid-stage foundation establishment. You must be here to fight for one of the 3 rankings. Talisman, elixir or weapon. The elixir and weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak. I won't comment on them." Upon hearing that, the crowd burst into laughter. In the previous sect competitions, none of the Misty Peak disciples could leave their names on the elixir and weapon rankings. The elixir and weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak were a joke in the eyes of everyone. When they heard the mocking laughter, everyone from Misty Peak had terrible expressions. The man in the red robe smiled and continued asking, "In that case, you're a talisman master?" "No," Shui shouted. "I'm not afraid to let you guys know that I'm a weapon refinement master. And I'm here for the weapon refinement segment." "Oh," the man in the red robe dragged out with a look of realization and said with a fake smile, "So you're a weapon refinement master. And one from Misty Peak at that. Sorry for the disrespect." Everyone present could hear the mockery in the man's tone. The man in the red robe continued, "What a coincidence. I'm Tao Feng and I'm a weapon refinement master as well." "So he's Tao Feng. Who's Tao Feng?" "The #1 weapon refinement master of True Fire Sect. He's only 30 years old and has successfully refined a superior grade spirit weapon. He's already an advanced weapon refinement master. It's rumored that fellow Taoist Tao Feng is the #1 weapon refinement master of the younger generation." When he heard the discussions in the crowd and sensed the envious gazes of the cultivators nearby, Tao Feng smiled and raised his chin slightly, looking at Shui smugly with a provocative gaze. "Fellow Taoist, how should I address you? I wonder what grade spirit weapon you can refine?" Shui blushed and did not say anything. Given his capabilities, he could only refine inferior grade spirit weapons and could not even refine middle grade spirit weapons. Naturally, he was far from being comparable to Tao Feng. Raising his brow, Tao Feng sneered, "So you're a nobody? You?" Shui glared at him. "What's there to be proud of?" Little Fatty pouted his lips. "The #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, Mr. Mo, is so incredible and his achievements are 1,000 times greater than yours. If you're really capable, go and compete with him." Tao Feng declared proudly, "Rumor has it that Mr. Mo is a perfected Jean Dan and must have lived for a few hundred years. I dare say that Mr. Mo definitely won't be able to reach my achievements at my age." None of the cultivators present had the right to refute. Furthermore, Tao Feng looked at Shui and sneered, "You think you're worthy of being called a weapon refinement master? Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't come out and embarrass yourself in the future. Hurry and scram back to your place." F***. Little Fatty's blood boiled and he was about to curse. "Junior brother." At the side, Ji Chengtian frowned and held back Little Fatty, who was enraged, shaking his head. "Forget it. Let's not argue with them. Let's sigh." When they heard Ji Chengtian's sigh, everyone from Misty Peak went silent and felt a sense of helplessness. No matter what, the current Misty Peak was indeed inferior to others. When he saw that, Tao Feng was even more smug and roared in laughter. "Misty Peak has no one to refine weapons and yet any Tom, Dick or Harry dares to claim to be a weapon refinement master. What a joke, haha." Who said that Misty Peak has no one to refine weapons? Right at this moment, another voice resounded from the crowd, and it faintly revealed a trace of golden killing intent. Chapter 305. Many cultivators turned towards the source of the voice with curious expressions. When they heard that voice, Little Fatty, Lung Ro and Shui were stunned for a moment as confusion flashed through their eyes. After a brief pause, Little Fatty's eyes widened as he exclaimed softly, "It's Big Bro." Lung Ro's expression changed and her eyes rippled. There was only one person that Little Fatty was referring to, Suzimo. Naturally, Lung Ro could tell that the person's voice was extremely similar to Suzimo's. However, that was impossible. Suzimo was clearly already. With a hint of anticipation and trepidation, everyone from Misty Peak turned around. Not far away, a green-robed cultivator walked over from the crowd with the Misty Peak sect badge on his waist. He had delicate features and exuded a scholarly aura, resembling a frail scholar. However, as the green-robed cultivator walked through the crowd, the surrounding cultivators subconsciously made way for him. It was as though there was an invisible aura around the green-robed cultivator. It was only after he walked over that everyone reacted with confused expressions, not knowing why they had moved aside just now. At that moment, even with Lung Ro's indifferent nature, her expression changed starkly as she exclaimed and covered her mouth hurriedly. Ji Chongtian was stunned and his eyes were filled with disbelief. "As junior brother Su, why you're still alive?" Shui Yi's voice was trembling with an agitated expression. Little Fatty squeezed through the crowd and arrived before Suzimo in the blink of an eye. He thumped Suzimo's chest repeatedly and grinned foolishly. It's true. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha." Smiling gently, Suzimo swept his gaze across Lung Ro, Shui and Jichintan before nodding. Even though he had heard about the outcome of the battle at Dongling Valley, Suzimo only felt a hint of sorrow when he saw that there were only a few people from his sect. This was not supposed to be the case. Initially, there should have been 100 top foundation establishment cultivators from Misty Peak with a huge commotion. Initially, even disciples of True Fire sect would not dare to speak rudely to Misty Peak disciples. But now, everyone from Misty Peak could only lower their heads helplessly in the face of the bullying and mockery of True Fire sect disciples. Suzimo's anger, but his expression turned colder. "Bro, where have you been for the past 3 years? Why haven't you heard? How did you survive back then?" Little Fatty had countless questions in his mind, waiting for Zimo's answer. "It's a long story. I'll tell you in the future if I have the chance." Suzimo swept his gaze across the disciples of True Fire sect and asked coldly, "Who said that Misty Peak has no talent in weapon refinement?" "I said so." Tao Feng sized up Suzimo and cracked his neck, scoffing. "Why? You're indignant? You even said that the weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak are a joke?" Suzimo did not reply and continued asking. "That's right, I said so." Tao Feng laughed. "Also, I'm telling you that's the truth. If you're indignant, that's easy too. Let's go down and compete. Junior brother Su, compete with him. We believe in you." Shui clenched his fists. Even though they had not seen each other for 3 years, Shui knew that Suzimo's weapon refinement skills were definitely better than his, and might even be able to refine middle-grade spirit weapons by now. "Do you dare to compete, Tao Feng looked at Suzimo provocatively. Suzimo did not even look at him and merely replied indifferently, "You're not qualified to compete with me." The moment he said that, the crowd went silent. In the blink of an eye, it became even noisier. "Haha, that lad is really funny. He's the first person who dares to say that Tao Feng is not qualified. Who is that person? He really doesn't know his place. That person must be ignorant. He doesn't even know who Tao Feng is and yet he dares to spout such nonsense. He's truly an embarrassment to Misty Peak." A series of mocking laughter sounded from the crowd as many cultivators pointed at Suzimo and gossiped. Tao Feng was extremely pleased as he looked at Suzimo with a smile, as though he was watching a joke. "Suzimo?" Right then, a woman's voice sounded from the other side of the crowd with a hint of doubt. Turning around, Suzimo met that person's gaze. After a slight pause, they looked away and returned to normal. Shenmeng Qi. The crowd over there were disciples of Iridescent Cloud's palace and Shenmeng Qi was among them. Ever since they parted ways in the capital of Yen country, Su Zimo no longer felt any emotions when he saw Shan Mengqi again. Shan Mengqi came to Su Zimo's side and frowned. It's really you. After 3 years, you're still as arrogant as ever. Do you know who he is? Shan Mengqi pointed at Tao Feng and questioned Su Zimo. Su Zimo shook his head. I don't know. With a reprimanding tone, Shan Mengqi said in a deep voice, he's Tao Feng, a weapon refinement master of True Fire Sect. True Fire Sect is known for their ability to control flames, and they can take at least 3 spots on the elixir and weapon rankings each time. However, Misty Peak can't even get a single spot. What do you have to compete with him in weapon refinement? I don't want to compete with him. I've already said that he's not qualified. Su Zimo's tone was still calm and natural, as though he was stating a fact. However, Su Zimo's words attracted even more mocking laughter. Shan Mengqi was so angry that she laughed instead. Fellow Taoist Tao Feng is known as the #1 weapon refinement master of the younger generation. If you say that he's not qualified, it will only show your ignorance and arrogance. That's right, I'm indeed ignorant. Su Zimo nodded with a look of mockery in his eyes. I believe in junior brother Su. Right then Leng Ro suddenly spoke. Although her voice was cold, it was extremely firm. If he says that Tao Feng is not qualified, then Tao Feng is definitely not qualified. When he heard that, Su Zimo smiled at Leng Ro and nodded. When she saw that, Shan Mengqi felt vexed for no reason. Fellow Taoist, I can understand that you want to support your fellow sect mates. However, don't be too blind or you'll only bring shame to Misty Peak. Shan Mengqi looked at Leng Ro and sneered. Let me tell you, in the capital of Great Zhou, there's only one person who has the right to say that Tao Feng is not qualified. That person is the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, Mr. Mo Ling. When they heard the words Mr. Mo, the crowd quietened down. This name did indeed have a strange magical power. Tao Feng nodded as well. If Mr. Mo is here, I'm willing to listen to his teachings. Pausing for a moment, Tao Feng glanced sideways at Su Zimo and changed the topic. However, who do you think you are? Shan Mengqi saw that Su Zimo was completely unmoved by the words Mr. Mo. His expression was calm and his eyes were calm. She could not help but shake her head and sigh softly. It seems like you haven't even heard of Mr. Mo's name. There was a sense of superiority in that sigh, as though it was an honor to have heard of Mr. Mo's name that was worth bragging about. Chapter 306. Su Zimo turned around and asked with a fake smile, Are you close to Mr. Mo? I? Shan Mengqi was stumped by the question and looked flustered. As a foundation establishment cultivator, how would she have the chance to know Mr. Mo? Su Zimo smiled. Seems like you're not close to Mr. Mo at all. Does that mean that you've met him before? Su Zimo's gaze seemed to have a deeper meaning. That feeling made Shan Mengqi feel inexplicably frustrated. Shan Mengqi composed herself and raised her chin. A look of pride flashed through her eyes as she said, I've never met Mr. Mo before. However, I've attended the auction that he organized. Without experiencing it personally, you'll never be able to imagine how powerful a weapon refinement master is. Su Zimo did not say anything and merely looked at Shan Mengqi calmly with a faint smile on his lips. You don't have to look at me like that. Shan Mengqi harumphed. What kind of person is Mr. Mo? It's normal that I haven't met him before. Even the thousands of perfected Jindan cultivators at the spectator area have not seen Mr. Mo's true appearance before, let alone me. Su Zimo smiled and looked at Shan Mengqi quietly, asking, What are you trying to say? I just want to tell you that even though you're here for the sect competition, it doesn't prove anything. Shan Mengqi clenched her fists. You're still as arrogant, conceited and ignorant as ever. You haven't even heard of Mr. Mo's name. I advise you not to join the competition lest you embarrass yourself. There was something else that Shan Mengqi did not say. Even though Su Zimo had started cultivating and was here for the sect competition, he would never be able to beat her. Shan Mengqi only wanted to prove one thing, something that she could not let go of all these years. That year, that day in that small town, her choice was not wrong. Your master is here too, right? Su Zimo suddenly asked. What are you doing? Instantly, Shan Mengqi turned nervous and frowned. Su Zimo, I advise you to calm down and not send yourself to your death. Master is really angry about what happened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, in the capital of Yen country, Su Zimo killed a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace and severely injured a group of Iridescent Cloud's palace cultivators. Naturally, this matter could not be hidden from perfected being Song Lang. Su Zimo smiled and said slowly, I heard that your master, perfected being Song Lang, has a good relationship with Mr. Mo. Mr. Mo is willing to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for him on a single condition. Chun Mengqi's expression changed. This was definitely a humiliation for perfected being Song Lang. In less than a day, the news had already spread through the entire capital. In Iridescent Cloud's palace, no one dared to discuss this matter at all. Su Zimo's gaze was deep as he said meaningfully, Chan Mengqi, have you ever wondered why Mr. Mo would propose such a condition? Almost everyone knew that the condition was for perfected being Song Lang to kneel. In an instant, Chan Mengqi seemed to have thought of something. Just as she was about to think about it carefully, a voice suddenly called out to her, interrupting her train of thought. Junior sister, he's Su Zimo? A man dressed in the Taoist robes of Iridescent Cloud's palace strode over. He was extraordinarily handsome and his footsteps were elegant as he glared at Su Zimo with a hint of killing intent. Chun Mengqi replied instinctively. She had already vaguely thought of an answer to Su Zimo's question just now. However, she was interrupted by her senior brother, Si Yutong, and could not recall it no matter how hard she tried. You're the one who killed a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace, Si Yutong came before Su Zimo and asked coldly with an unfriendly expression. It's me. Su Zimo's tone was indifferent. That lad is truly audacious to have killed a cultivator of Iridescent Cloud's palace. Misty Peak was already weak this time round. To think that such a disciple would appear and make so many enemies, offending True Fire Sect and Iridescent Cloud's palace in one go. I think Misty Peak is doomed this time round. The nearby cultivators discussed fervently and watched the commotion from the side. Chan Mengqi frowned and persuaded softly, Senior brother, forget it. This is the capital of Great Zhou. Forget it, Fufu? Si Yutong was unmoved and sneered. Su Zimo, do you dare to participate in the fight for the spirit ranking? Before Su Zimo could say anything, a sudden exclamation from the crowd attracted everyone's attention. Look over there. To think that they can fly in the capital. Who are they? By the looks of it, they should be a few princes. Not far away in the skies, a total of 5 men flew over under the escort of a group of powerful Jindan Imperial Guards. They were dressed luxuriously and had a graceful bearing as they descended slowly to the spectator area. The 5 of them arrived below the Emperor's throne and took their seats in the second area, nodding to their surroundings. Before long, a commotion broke out from the crowd once more. Not far away in the sky, 2 women were walking on air as they flew over. The woman at the front was extremely beautiful and had a smile on her face. She had a voluptuous figure and exuded a mature and seductive charm. The other girl wore a pink dress and had a petite figure with curves. Unfortunately, her face was covered by a veil and her appearance could not be seen clearly. Si Yutong coughed gently and said proudly, if I'm not wrong, the person in front should be Chief Steward Gu of Sky Treasure Auction House. Chief Steward Gu is truly a beauty of a generation. Another cultivator had an infatuated expression as he gulped. Who's that girl behind her? Although she's covered by a veil, her eyes are truly beautiful as though they can speak. Just as everyone was discussing, the girl in pink in midair suddenly turned around and looked over. Her large watery eyes blinked before curling into a pair of crescent moons with a bright smile. Look, that girl in pink is looking at me. Don't spout nonsense, she must be looking at me. The cultivators nearby started arguing. Tao Feng of True Fire Sect sneered internally but pretended to be calm as he nodded to the girl in pink. It was the same for Si Yutong. Thinking that the girl in pink had noticed him, he nodded hurriedly in acknowledgement. When Su Zimo saw that, he sighed internally. Demoness Ji's methods were truly formidable. If she were to grow up in the future, she would definitely be someone who could topple the world. Right in front of everyone, Gushi and Demoness Ji descended slowly and sat down in the second area of the spectator area with the prince. Initially, many cultivators did not know who was seated in the second area. Now that they saw it, they were enlightened. Those seated in the second area were either members of the royal family or the most powerful cultivators in the capital. There were not many seats in the second area. By the time Gushi and Demoness Ji sat down, there were only 2 seats left. Look! Someone in the crowd pointed into the distance and exclaimed. In the distant skies, a group of palace maids flew over. Dressed in gauze with ribbons around their necks, all of them were extremely beautiful. Many palace maids were standing on auspicious clouds, escorting a graceful and luxurious carriage as it slowly approached. Inside the carriage sat a slender and exquisite figure. Under the cover of the bead curtain, it was faintly discernible, and her appearance could not be seen clearly. There were more than 100,000 cultivators around the sunken area. At that moment, their mouths were agape with shocked expressions. Chapter 307. She must be the third princess of Great Zhou. I heard that the third princess used the alias Yaoshua to cultivate in Azure Frost sect. Now that she has regained her identity, I'm sure she won't return to Azure Frost sect. I heard that the third princess is beautiful and devastatingly beautiful. It would be great if I could take a closer look. Discussions broke out in the crowd. Tao Feng pondered for a moment and his eyes lit up in realization. So it's fellow Taoist Yaoshua. In that case, I've met the third princess once before. Senior brother Tao, you're amazing. Senior brother Tao, is the third princess as beautiful as the rumors say? Beside Tao Feng, many true fire sect disciples revealed envious expressions and fought to ask questions. Tao Feng was delighted. On the other side, Si Yutong smiled leisurely. Back then, I had the honor of chatting with fellow Taoist Yaoshua. At that time, I already felt that she had an extraordinary aura. It's no wonder then that she has such a background. Si Yutong's words were extremely particular. On the one hand, he was flaunting that he had chatted with the third princess of Great Zhou. On the other hand, he was praising himself for having good taste. The moment Si Yutong said that, it naturally attracted the flattery of a group of cultivators as well. Next to Iridescent Cloud's palace, Misty Peak and True Fire sect were the 100 Foundation establishment disciples of Azure Frost sect. When they heard the discussions from Tao Feng and Si Yutong's side, many Azure Frost sect disciples sneered. One of them said, our senior brother Jun and senior sister Yaoshua are close friends and did not say anything. Yet, you guys think that it's worth bragging about having met and exchanged a single sentence? What a joke. That's right. Only senior brother Jun is worthy of senior sister Yaoshua. The senior brother Jun that the Azure Frost sect disciples were talking about was Jun Hao, the #1 foundation establishment cultivator of Azure Frost sect. He had pursued Yaoshua bitterly for many years, but the latter's attitude towards him was neither warm nor cold. At that moment, Jun Hao stood at the front of the many Azure Frost sect disciples with his hands behind his back. He had an imposing aura and merely smiled indifferently without saying anything. As everyone was discussing, the carriage that was flying towards the spectator area suddenly stopped and changed directions, heading over slowly. Could it be that the third princess is coming over? Tao Feng suddenly straightened his clothes, feeling a little nervous. Si Yutong's heart suddenly started pounding, and he felt his mouth go dry. The same thought flashed through their minds at the same time. Could it be that the third princess is here to see me? The carriage in the air was clearly descending in front of them. Senior sister Yaoshua is here. Senior brother Jun, the third princess must be here for you. A few Azure Frost sect disciples said excitedly. Jun Hao of the Azure Frost sect smiled and looked at the people in the carriage with a gentle gaze. Crash! An arm as white as a lotus root stretched out and lifted the bead curtain, revealing an elegant, beautiful and flawless face. Everyone held their breaths. Ji Yaoshua was wearing a light yellow robe. The material of the robe was unique and intricate patterns were engraved on it. It was as if it was made by the heavens and was extremely beautiful. So beautiful! A series of exclamations could be heard from the crowd. In reality, Ji Yaoshua's appearance could not be considered as peerless, nor could she compare to Dai Yu. She was only comparable to Lung Ro, and each had their own merits. However, she was the princess of Great Zhou after all. The light yellow robe on her today was different as well and matched her perfectly. It accentuated her slender figure and added a sense of nobility and elegance. A weapon refinement master's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice, "That robe is not simple. It seems to be an extremely high-grade defensive spirit weapon. As expected of the princess of the Great Zhou dynasty, even a casual robe is a high-grade defensive spirit weapon. By the looks of it, it seems like it was tailor-made for her. Many cultivators revealed envious gazes. Some of the female cultivators were even jealous, imagining how they would look like wearing the light yellow robe. With light steps, Ji Yaoshua walked towards the crowd. Instinctively, the crowd parted and made way for her. Junhao of Azure Frost Sect cupped his fists and said sincerely with a smile, "Junior sister Yaoshua, it's only been a few days since we last met. You're really getting prettier." Junhao could not continue. Initially, he thought that Ji Yaoshua was here for him. However, earlier on, Ji Yaoshua merely glanced at him casually and nodded as a form of greeting. Ji Yaoshua brushed past him without saying anything. In fact, she did not even stop in her tracks. A fragrant wind blew past, leaving Junhao's hands hanging in midair with a slightly stiff expression. Tao Feng was delighted when he saw that. Although he was looking forward to it, Tao Feng did not have much hope. After all, he had only met Ji Yaoshua once. But now Ji Yaoshua was completely ignoring Junhao of Azure Frost Sect and was walking towards him. When he saw Ji Yaoshua approaching, Tao Feng coughed gently and revealed a radiant smile. "I'm Tao Feng. Greetings, third." Tao Feng could not continue. Ji Yaoshua glanced at him and walked past him without even nodding. That gaze was as though she was looking at a stranger. Little Fatty finally got the chance and could not help but laugh. "Oh, the princess doesn't even know you. You've only met her once?" Tao Feng harumphed with a dark expression. When he saw the third princess of Great Zhou walking towards him, Si Yutong took a deep breath and composed himself. Taking a few steps forward, he bowed slightly and cupped his fists. Ji Yaoshua did not even look at him and walked past Si Yutong. With an awkward expression, Si Yutong's face flushed red and he wanted nothing more than to find a hole to hide in. Who is the third princess looking for? I don't know. As Ji Yaoshua walked over, the crowd parted to the sides. Only one person did not move and was extremely eye-catching. Su Zimo, what are you standing there for? Aren't you going to move aside? Chen Mengqi frowned and hollered. Su Zimo did not say anything. Chen Mengqi sneered, Su Zimo, you've offended True Fire Sect in Iridescent Cloud's palace. In the capital, perhaps no one can do anything to you. However, if you offend the third princess of Great Zhou, no one can save you. Su Zimo remained silent. Why are you still as stubborn as when you were young? You won't kneel when I ask you to and move aside when I ask you to. Chen Mengqi gritted her teeth and walked towards Su Zimo, wanting to push him away. Right then, Ji Yaoshua had already arrived before Su Zimo and stopped in her tracks. Chen Mengqi also stopped in her tracks instinctively. The initially noisy crowd suddenly quietened down. Everyone's gazes were on Ji Yaoshua. However, Ji Yaoshua's gaze was on Su Zimo's face. The two of them exchanged glances. Ji Yaoshua turned around gently and her pale yellow robes fluttered slightly, resembling the rippling heart of a young girl in love. Ji Yaoshua blinked her bright eyes and asked with a smile, Zimo, how is it? Everyone was dumbfounded. Their jaws almost dropped to the ground. Chen Mengqi's mind was in a mess. Zimo? The third princess was calling him Zimo? Why was she calling him so intimately? What rights did she have? Ji Yaoshua's question came out of nowhere, and no one understood what she was asking. However, she knew that Su Zimo would definitely be able to understand it. That was because the person before her was the one who gave her that pale yellow robe personally. Su Zimo nodded. Very beautiful. The next moment, she smiled like a flower. Chapter 308. In a woman's heart, no matter how many praises others gave her, they could not compare to those two words from his mouth. The woman's smile stunned everyone present and made their hearts skip a beat. Many cultivators were petrified on the spot and could not recover for a long time. No matter how they listened, their conversation did not sound right. What were the two of them doing in front of everyone? Initially, many cultivators still harbored some fantasies about the third princess of Great Zhou, but now they felt a sharp pain in their chests, as though they had suffered a heavy blow. Shui said in disbelief, This, junior brother Su knows the third princess? Little Fatty pinched his chubby chin and his eyes burned with the flames of gossip as he smiled lasciviously. By the looks of it, their relationship isn't simple. Tao Feng's expression darkened as he glared at Su Zimo with obvious hostility. Just now, Si Yutong had already returned to the crowd after being humiliated. He snorted with a dark expression. What's going on? He's not here for senior brother Jun? Who is that? Why is he so familiar with senior sister Yaoshua? Many Azure Frost sect disciples frowned and discussed softly. Taking a deep breath of air, Junhao lowered his head and clenched his fists behind his back. Green veins popped out on his fists before disappearing after a while. Ji Yaoshua was delighted to receive Su Zimo's acknowledgement and said softly, "Wait here for a while. The sect competition is about to begin." "Yes." Su Zimo nodded. "I'll head over first then." Ji Yaoshua smiled and waved to Su Zimo before turning to leave in front of everyone. Just now, her actions were rather bold and she mustered her courage. Even now, her heart was still thumping wildly when she thought about it. Coupled with the fiery gazes from all around, she could not help but feel shy despite being a princess and was too embarrassed to continue staying. Junhao noticed the shyness and gentleness that Ji Yaoshua inadvertently revealed. He couldn't help but frown as a trace of imperceptible gloominess flashed through the depths of his eyes. Then Junhao's expression changed. His eyes flickered and he seemed to be deep in thought. No, just now Ji Yaoshua had said something wrong. The intersect tournament was about to begin. Ji Yaoshua asked Su Zimo to wait here for a while. After a while, what was she going to do? Or what was this Su Zimo trying to do? Just to participate in the sect tournament? Then I'll head over first. This was Ji Yaoshua's second sentence. First, it didn't sound like much. However, after careful consideration, it became even more problematic. As the princess of Great Zhou, Ji Yaoshua was going to the second spectator area. Why would she tell Su Zimo that she would head over first? Ji Yaoshua wouldn't have said that unless Su Zimo was going to head over as well. However, was that possible? Who were the people seated in the second spectator area? What right did a foundation establishment cultivator like him have to do that? Junhao looked around without batting an eyelid. Many cultivators were excited and discussed fervently. Most of their discussions were about the third princess's peerless beauty and her relationship with Su Zimo. There was also a group of people who were immersed in the scene just now and could not extricate themselves from it. Other than him, no one else noticed the abnormality in Ji Yaoshua's words. Perhaps I'm thinking too much. Junhao lamented internally. I've got it. Right then, a cultivator in the crowd suddenly said, as though he had discovered a huge secret. What? Another person asked. That person said slowly, did you guys notice? After the third princess sat down, there was only a single seat left in the second spectator area. That's right, so what? That person smiled smugly. I'm willing to bet that that seat is definitely reserved for Mr. Mo. Many cultivators pondered for a moment before realization dawned on them. That's right, it must be Mr. Mo. Yes, only Mr. Mo has that right. That seat is on par with the princes and princesses and can be said to be second only to one. Indeed, Mr. Mo is the only one who can suppress all the perfected Jindan cultivators. When he heard the discussions around him, Junhao's heart lightened as he heaved a long sigh of relief and laughed involuntarily. Since that seat is reserved for Mr. Mo, it has nothing to do with Su Zimo. In that case, I'm indeed thinking too much. In reality, a few elders of True Fire sect in the spectator area had seen Mr. Mo's appearance in the palace before. However, there was still a huge distance between the spectator area and the sunken area. Coupled with the fact that there were 100,000 foundation establishment cultivators, their attention was not on that area at all. At the spectator area, most of the perfected Jindan cultivators were drinking and chatting merrily. Although the sect competition was a fight for foundation establishment cultivators, for many perfected Jindan cultivators, it was also a great opportunity to network and rope in factions. Senior brother, what are you thinking about? Lu Hui could not help but ask softly when she saw Xian Yi's melancholic expression. As he looked at the 100,000 foundation establishment cultivators in a daze, Xian Yi retracted his gaze and shook his head. Nothing. Just now there was a commotion in the crowd. In his daze, he seemed to have caught sight of a familiar green robe. However, it was drowned in the crowd in the blink of an eye. Xianyi sighed gently, thinking that he was hallucinating due to his mental fatigue. Fellow Taoist Xianyi. Right then a greeting sounded from the side. Xianyi turned and saw that it was perfected being Songlang of Iridescent Cloud's palace. Perfected being Songlang raised his wine glass and asked with a smile, I heard that there's an inner sect disciple in Misty Peak named Su Zimo. I wonder who he's under? Xianyi frowned. Why do you ask, fellow Taoist Songlang? Fu, it's nothing. Perfected being Songlang chuckled. I have some grudges with that lad and would like to ask for him from Misty Peak. I wonder if you can give me some face. No. Xianyi didn't even think about it and flatly refused. Perfected being Songlang narrowed his eyes slightly and his expression darkened as he said slowly, that man killed 2 of my disciples. How should we settle the score? So what if they died because they were inferior? Aren't you embarrassed that a perfected Jindan cultivator like you is seeking revenge? Xianyi sneered. Perfected being Songlang said coolly, Xianyi, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't ruin the relationship between Iridescent Cloud's palace and Misty Peak, just because of a foundation establishment cultivator. Can you represent Iridescent Cloud's palace? Perfected being Songlang. It was just a few sentences and the 2 of them were already at odds with each other. Right then, someone at the side laughed sinisterly. Brother Songlang, there's no need to argue with him. Misty Peak is already on the decline and he's still so stubborn. He's just asking for trouble. Sima Ji, what are you trying to do? Xianyi's expression changed slightly. Perfected being Songlang smiled. Brother Sima, what can I do for you? Sima Ji of True Fire Sect said leisurely. Misty Peak only brought a few people this time round. As long as our sects join forces during the fight for the spirit ranking, it won't matter even if Misty Peak has a 5 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. Alright, we'll let Misty Peak return empty-handed this time round without a single spot. A mocking look flashed through Perfected being Songlang's eyes as he laughed. One of the 5 major sects? Fufu, Misty Peak is done for. Chapter 309. Despicable. Xianyi clenched his fists and cursed through gritted teeth. To begin with, Misty Peak was already weak in this sect competition with only a 5 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. If they were targeted as well, they would truly have no chance at all. Roar! Right then, a deafening roar sounded from the distant horizon, shaking the voids in an incomparably dignified manner. Everyone's heart skipped a beat as they turned towards the sound. 5 tall and ferocious-looking lions galloped over in a menacing manner. Their fur was golden without any impurities, as though they were burning with golden flames. It's a golden lion. That's an ancient remnant beast. Furthermore, it's a golden lion of the Jindan realm. The 5 golden lions were tied with metal reins and pulled an ancient war chariot behind them. A middle-aged man in golden robes stood on the war chariot. His eyes were like lightning and he exuded a domineering aura that could sweep through the world. The person on the war chariot was the Emperor of Great Zhou. Greetings, Your Majesty. All the imperial army guards present knelt on one knee and hollered in unison with a frightening aura. Perfected Jindan, who was at the spectator area, stood up hurriedly and cupped their fists, nodding in acknowledgement. Soldiers, rise. Everyone, please take a seat. The Emperor's tone was calm as he leaped down from the war chariot and sat down at the highest position of the spectator area. We've finally met the Emperor of Great Zhou. We didn't waste our time coming to this sect competition. What an imposing aura. Just now I'm almost kneeling as well. Many Foundation establishment cultivators around the 4 jade pillars were impressed by the Emperor's demeanor and discussed softly with excited expressions. Su Zimo had an indifferent expression and his eyes were calm as water, as though the Emperor's arrival did not affect him at all. Sweeping her gaze, Chen Mengqi asked in a seemingly casual manner, Su Zimo, how did you get to know the Princess of Great Zhou? What has it got to do with you? Su Zimo did not even look at Chen Mengqi as he asked instead. Chen Mengqi harumphed and said, Su Zimo, don't be smug. It's no big deal to know the Princess of Great Zhou. Furthermore, let me remind you that you've already made enemies with Iridescent Cloud's Palace and True Fire Sect. Because of the Princess of Great Zhou, I saw that the disciples of Azure Frost Sect were also hostile towards you. Shan Mengqi sneered. The actions of the Princess of Great Zhou have unknowingly created many strong enemies for you. Let's see how you're going to deal with this later. Su Zimo smiled faintly. On the spectator stand, the emperor pressed his hands down and the crowd gradually quietened down. The emperor said in a deep voice, "The sect competition will begin soon. Before that, I'd like to introduce a weapon refinement master. I'm sure everyone has heard of him. The #1 weapon refiner of the Great Zhou dynasty, Mr. Mo Ling. Of course we know." On the spectator stand, many Jindan perfected persons smiled and nodded with anticipation in their eyes. The emperor continued, "Although you guys have heard of his name, I'm sure not many of you have seen his true appearance." "That's right." Perfected being Yi Ning smiled bitterly. "I wanted to thank Mr. Mo personally the previous time, but unfortunately, I didn't get to see him either." Perfected being Yun Shan of Southern Mountains sect nodded as well. "That's right. Mr. Mo is way too mysterious." The emperor smiled gently. "This time round, I've invited Mr. Mo to be a judge for the weapon refinement segment of the sect competition. Everyone, you'll be able to see him soon." Many perfected being Jindan were invigorated. Which perfected being Jindan would not want to befriend a weapon refinement master that could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons? Perfected being Song Lang narrowed his eyes and scanned the surroundings as well. He wanted to see who this Mr. Mo was, and what grudges he had with him for him to humiliate him in public. Many Foundation establishment cultivators around the 4 jade pillars widened their eyes and looked into the distant skies repeatedly, wanting to catch sight of the legendary Mr. Mo immediately. "How do you guys think Mr. Mo will appear?" "Don't worry, it won't be any weaker than the princes and princesses. Given Mr. Mo's strength and status, I believe that he'll even come riding on a pure-blooded ferocious beast." Everyone was curious as they discussed excitedly. Little Fatty turned around as well and asked excitedly, "Bro, how old do you think Mr. Mo is and what he looks like?" Su Zimo replied, "In his 20s, I guess." "Ha ha ha." The moment Su Zimo spoke, a burst of laughter sounded from the surroundings. Many people looked at Su Zimo as though they were looking at an idiot. Tao Feng's eyes were filled with mockery as he chuckled. "A weapon refinement master of Misty Peak is truly a joke, Fufu." Shin Mengqi frowned. "Su Zimo, if you don't know, just say so. No one will blame you. You'll only attract the ridicule of others and expose your ignorance by spouting nonsense like that." "Oh." Su Zimo raised his brow slightly. Shin Mengqi said in a deep voice, "Mr. Mo can customize supreme-grade spirit weapons. Do you think that's something a person in his 20s can do? Even if I don't know how to refine weapons, I can understand that logic." Right then, the emperor's voice sounded once more. "Actually, Mr. Mo has arrived a long time ago. He's right in the middle of everyone." "Ah, Mr. Mo is already here. Where is he?" At the spectator area, all the perfected Jindan cultivators turned to look beside them instinctively, only to realize that the other party was looking over in confusion as well. The emperor raised his voice. "Mr. Mo, please head to the spectator area." The moment he said that, the thousands of perfected Jindan cultivators and the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators went silent. Everyone held their breaths and scanned their surroundings continuously. Everyone from Misty Peak, Tao Feng, Junhao, Si Yutong, Shen Mengqi, and the others were searching instinctively as well. All of a sudden, a figure moved and walked past everyone, attracting everyone's gazes. "Su Zimo, what are you doing?" Shen Mengqi frowned and shouted. Su Zimo was unmoved. Tao Feng sneered, "You really don't know what's good for you. How dare you act so brazenly in front of the emperor?" "He's calling for Mr. Mo, not you," Shen Mengqi shouted again. However, she suddenly realized something and her expression changed. As though he did not hear anything, Su Zimo continued walking forward. Under Little Fatty's stunned gaze, he patted the latter on the shoulder and smiled faintly, passing through the crowd and walking out. Looking at Su Zimo's back view, Junhao of Azure Frost sect shuddered and vaguely thought of a possibility. Even though that possibility seemed ridiculous and crazy, in the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was exposed before the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators. Under countless burning gazes, Su Zimo did not look uneasy at all. Instead, he was calm and composed as he walked forward slowly with his hands behind his back. He crossed the sunken area and headed towards the spectator area. Who is that? What is he doing? He's only in his 20s. There's no way he's Mr. Mo, that's right. How can a foundation establishment cultivator be Mr. Mo? Many cultivators in the crowd sneered. After sneering, everyone looked at Suzimo, who was gradually walking away. However, the crowd suddenly went silent. A weak voice sounded. None of us have seen Mr. Mo before. Why can't he be a foundation establishment cultivator in his 20s? Nobody replied. Everyone was waiting for an answer. Chapter 310. At the spectator area, the moment the emperor said that, many perfected Jindan cultivators had already begun patrolling and discussing, wanting to discover Mr. Mo's whereabouts as soon as possible. Some of the perfected Jindan cultivators noticed the green-robed cultivator walking over from afar, but did not take it to heart. After all, he was only a foundation establishment cultivator in his 20s and nobody would pay attention to him. However, as time passed by, nobody stood out from the spectator area. Instead, the green-robed cultivator walked straight towards the spectator area, and was getting closer. More and more perfected Jindan cultivators noticed this. Elder Zhang of Azure Frost sect had seen Mo Ling in the palace before and merely harumphed when he saw the green-robed cultivator walking over. However, right after, Elder Zhang's gaze narrowed and landed on the sect badge on the green-robed cultivator's waist, unable to shift his gaze away. Indeed, Elder Zhang had seen Mo Ling's appearance before. However, he did not know of Mo Ling's true identity, nor did he know of Mo Ling's relationship with Misty Peak. Sima Ji frowned and asked Elder Zhang, haven't you seen Mo Ling before? Where is he? How could this be? How could this be? He's actually from Misty Peak. As though he did not hear anything, Elder Zhang muttered to himself with a dazed expression, looking as though he had lost his soul. The third area was filled with perfected Jindan cultivators of the 5 major sections. Noticing Elder Zhang's abnormality as well, they followed his gaze and looked down. Perfected Jindan cultivators of Azure Frost sect and Southern Mountain sect did not have much of a reaction and merely frowned, confused as to why this Misty Peak Foundation establishment cultivator was walking over. However, perfected being Songlang narrowed his eyes with a flash of killing intent. Suzimo, do you think that I can't touch you just because Misty Peak is protecting you? Perfected being Songlang scoffed coldly and downed the wine in his cup. Ah! Lu Hui exclaimed softly and looked at the green-robed cultivator in disbelief. Xian Yi's expression changed starkly as well. In his shock, he stood up with a look of ecstasy in his eyes. He was not dead. He was indeed still alive. At this moment, Xian Yi suddenly felt a lot more relaxed. Suzimo did not die, which proved that there was a successor to his sword formation technique. When Suzimo went back and cultivated for another 10 years, when the next sect grand competition began with his talent, he might be able to leave his name on the artifact board. Perhaps after another 10 years of cultivation, Suzimo would be qualified to compete for the spirit role. Thinking of this, Xian Yi couldn't help but smile. It didn't matter even if Misty Peak didn't get a spot in the intersect tournament. At least Suzimo was still alive, and Misty Peak's hopes were not extinguished. If when Xian knew that you were still alive, perhaps he would feel a little better, Xian Yi said in his heart. Below the spectator area, many perfected Jindan frowned as they looked at the approaching green-robed cultivator with displeasure. This was the seat of perfected Jindan after all. It was not a place where a foundation establishment cultivator could casually enter. Even if it was a foundation establishment cultivator from Misty Peak, he could not break the rules. The discussions at the spectator area grew louder, and many perfected Jindan cultivators revealed displeased expressions. At the entrance of the spectator area, the bearded man, Bai Yuhan and Bald Vulture had calm expressions and ignored them. Hey! A perfected Jindan cultivator who had drunk quite a bit of alcohol stood up with a flushed face and shouted at the 3 guards. 3 burp. Fellow Taoists, who is this? That person raised his wine glass and pointed at Suzimo from afar while burping. The 3 great protectors lowered their eyes, not saying a word. That person's body swayed and his eyes were blurry as he shouted. This is the spectator area of perfected Jindan. What is this person trying to do here? Huh! You guards of the capital and the Imperial Army, chase him away. The three guards did not move at all, as though they did not hear anything. The discussions at the spectator area gradually quietened down. Some cultivators with sharp minds gradually snapped back to their senses. The green-robed cultivator had already arrived. Not only did the three guards not have any intention of stopping him, even the emperor had acquiesced to it. What did that mean? Puzzled. Many cultivators secretly gasped as their expressions changed slightly. Could it be? That young foundation establishment cultivator could not be. The drunken perfected Jindan cultivator sobered up slightly as well. Shaking his head, he tried his best to open his eyes and look at the newcomer. At that moment, more than 100,000 foundation establishment cultivators and more than 1,000 perfected Jindan cultivators were focused on the green-robed cultivator, who was about to step onto the golden carpet. Everyone was watching. When Su Zimo arrived at the spectator area, the three guards on both sides bowed and cupped their fists at the same time. Mr. Imo, please take a seat. Su Zimo nodded with a calm expression and stepped onto the golden carpet, ascending it. Boom! The moment those words were said, it was as though a gigantic rock had been tossed into a calm lake, causing a huge wave to surge in everyone's hearts. The huge square was completely silent at this moment. It was as if an invisible force was choking everyone's throat, making it impossible for them to breathe. It was the same at the spectator area. Time seemed to have stopped on and off the stage. Everyone was petrified on the spot, motionless. The green-robed cultivator on the golden carpet was the only one who was still walking over step by step. Clang! The wine glass in the drunken perfected Jindan cultivator's hand fell to the ground with a loud sound. That sound seemed to have broken the frozen time. The man broke out in a cold sweat and instantly sobered up, recalling what he had just said. His whole body quivered and he hurriedly bowed with cupped fists. With a terrified expression he said, Greetings, Mr. Imo. The cultivators at the bottom of the spectator area were all itinerant cultivators. After all, these itinerant cultivators had not experienced much. Coupled with the fact that Mo Ling's name was way too prominent and frightening, some of them stood up instinctively. Mr. Mo. Mr. Mo. As Su Zimo advanced, rows of perfected Jindan cultivators on both sides of the spectator area stood up and greeted him with cupped fists. It was a spectacular sight. Stars surrounding the moon accumulating the momentum. At that moment, everyone neglected the age and cultivation of the person before them. All they could sense from this green-robed cultivator was a domineering aura that shocked everyone present and was irresistible. The higher the steps, the higher the strength and status of the perfected Jindan cultivators on both sides. Initially, some of the perfected Jindan cultivators at the back did not intend to stand up and greet him because of their status. However, the hundreds of perfected Jindan cultivators at the front had all stood up. If they were to sit still, they would be too conspicuous. There was almost no time to think. Coupled with the fact that their minds were in a mess, they stood up instinctively when Su Zimo walked over. As Su Zimo walked over, the perfected Jindan cultivators on the spectator area became a part of the background. Good. Xianyi was agitated as he said repeatedly. As a perfected Jindan cultivator, Lu Hui covered her mouth as her eyes reddened. Unable to suppress her emotions, she actually burst into tears. After arriving in the capital, they had suffered way too much coldness and mockery. Misty Peak was on the decline, Misty Peak was done for, and Misty Peak was about to be kicked out of the 5 major sections. She was powerless to refute. However, at this moment, all the rumors vanished into thin air. She finally understood why the 3 commanders told them that Misty Peak was about to become famous again. Chapter 311. Under countless gazes and the greetings of the many perfected Jindan beings, Su Zimo arrived before Xianyi and Lu Hui. Bowing deeply, he said in a deep voice, Greetings, Peak Masters, I'm Su Zimo of Misty Peak. Good child. Hurry and get up. Xianyi hurried forward to support Su Zimo's arms with an emotional expression. So Mr. Mo's real name is Su Zimo. Mr. Mo is at Foundation establishment at such a young age. Didn't they say that Misty Peak is bad at weapon refinement? How did such a monster incarnate appear out of nowhere? Our ancestral graves are fuming. Many perfected Jindan beings muttered softly as they looked at Su Zimo with curious gazes. Lu Hui turned around and wiped her tears. She smiled and said, Xianyi, don't hold him anymore. Let him sit down. Right. Enlightened, Xianyi said. Hurry and go over. We'll talk about your matters when we get back. There's plenty of time. Yes. Su Zimo nodded and turned to continue walking forward. His gaze shifted and landed on perfected being Song Lang, who was not far away. Their gazes met. Su Zimo smiled. Perfected being Song Lang's eyes widened as he looked at Su Zimo, who was approaching. His face was ashen and he could not bring himself to smile. How could this be? 3 years ago, when he heard that Su Zimo had become a cultivator as well, perfected being Song Lang merely smiled indifferently. Even if Su Zimo were to enter the cultivation world, he would never be able to catch up to him. In his eyes, Su Zimo was still that ant that he could trample on and crush as he pleased. However, that ant in the past had grown a little bigger. Perfected being Song Lang had cultivated for more than 200 years. What was his current status, strength and status? Just the connections he had accumulated over the past 200 years were enough to crush Su Zimo. But now, the moment Su Zimo stepped onto the golden carpet, perfected being Song Lang suddenly realized that apart from his own strength, all his advantages were gone. In terms of status, influence and connections, he was no match for Su Zimo. Or rather, he couldn't compare to Mr. Mo. A month ago, at the entrance of Mo's spirit weapon workshop, Su Zimo had promised that his head could be exchanged for a supreme-grade spirit weapon. Perfected being Song Lang could clearly sense that many perfected Jin Dan were tempted back then, and even revealed a hint of killing intent. If not for the fact that he was in the capital where no one dared to act rashly, it was very likely that he would be besieged. Fate was such a wonderful thing. In the past, perfected being Song Lang could kill Su Zimo with ease with a snap of his fingers. Right now, a single promise from Su Zimo was almost exchanged for perfected being Song Lang's head. Su Zimo passed by perfected being Song Lang and paused for a moment before sighing gently. Song Lang, do you still remember what I said back then? Without waiting for perfected being Song Lang's reply, Su Zimo had already walked over. Even though it had been many years, for some reason, perfected being Song Lang could still remember that scene clearly. The young man was expressionless and said in an extremely calm tone, "If you don't kill me, you'll definitely regret it in the future." Suddenly, perfected being Song Lang regretted it. In the square, the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators were completely dumbfounded. Apart from those from Misty Peak who were jumping for joy, the other cultivators had conflicted expressions. Just now, all of them were treating Su Zimo as a joke. It was only at this moment that they realized that the true joke was themselves. Jun Hao of Azure Frost Sect heaved a long sigh of relief. Even though he had expected it, he was still rather shocked when he found out about the outcome. Tao Feng of True Fire Sect had an uncertain expression. Each time he recalled what he had said just now, his face would turn paler. Hey fellow Taoist Tao Feng, you don't seem too happy that my big bro said that you're not qualified? Little Fatty asked with a grin. Tao Feng's expression darkened and he remained silent. Tisk tsk. Little Fatty pouted his lips. Who was the one who was so arrogant earlier on, and even wanted to compete with my big bro in weapon refinement? Why aren't you saying anything now? Don't be a coward. Tao Feng grit his teeth and shuddered, but he could not say anything. He had said too many things earlier on and now, every single one of them was thrown back at him with a burning pain in his face. Beside Tao Feng stood a man with a cold aura. He looked at Su Zimo, who was at the spectator area, with a murderous intent in his eyes. At the thought of how he had provoked Su Zimo earlier on, Si Yutong felt a little guilty and laughed dryly. Who would have thought that he would be Mr. Mo? Phew. No one bothered with him and he felt a little awkward. Junior sister, don't you think so? Si Yutong turned around and asked. At the side, Shen Mengqi did not seem to have heard anything. It was as though she had lost her soul as she stared blankly at the spectator area at the figure that was gradually getting further and higher. In that instant she suddenly understood many things. Why did Mr. Mo send a verbal order for her master, perfected being Song Lang, to kneel down a month ago? Why did Su Zimo say that Tao Feng was not qualified? Why did Su Zimo remain indifferent at the mention of Mr. Mo's name? Why did Su Zimo look at her with that strange gaze when she mentioned Mr. Mo? Why did even the third princess of Great Zhou take the initiative to come over? Why only one answer was needed to explain all of these countless doubts. Su Zimo was Mr. Mo. At that moment, she suddenly felt like a fool. The actions of the Princess of Great Zhou have unknowingly created many strong enemies for you. Let's see how you're going to clean up this mess later. Recalling what she said just now, Shun Mengqi laughed self-deprecatingly. Su Zimo did not need to clean up the mess at all. That was because it was enough for him to reveal his identity. Shun Mengqi was lost. She had once thought that she would soar into the skies after obtaining the 1-in-a-million immortal opportunity, and be separated from Su Zimo forever, becoming someone from two different worlds. But now she suddenly realized something. After a few years, everything she had was nothing in front of Su Zimo. Her life might not even be comparable to a promise from Su Zimo. Suddenly, Shun Mengqi regretted it. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at the second area where there was only an empty seat. This was a seat that was second only to one and above everyone else. It was the same as the princes and princesses and the manager of Sky Treasure Auction House. The emperor pointed. Have a seat. Su Zimo nodded. Beside the empty seat was Ji Yaoshua. The two of them exchanged glances and smiled. The moment Su Zimo sat down, a fragrance wafted over. Immediately after, another person appeared on the other side of Su Zimo. Su Zimo glanced sideways and was slightly stunned. It was Demoness Ji who had moved the seat to his left and was right beside him. With that, Su Zimo's seat was sandwiched between the two princesses. Su Zimo coughed gently and felt a little uncomfortable. I'll sit here, Demoness Ji chuckled. Ji Yaoshua looked at her younger sister dotingly and shook her head with a chuckle. The princes seemed to understand Demoness Ji's temper as well and smiled without saying anything. Instead, they nodded towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Others might not have been able to tell, but he could vaguely sense that Demoness Ji's laughter was a little strange. I wonder what this Demoness is thinking about. Su Zimo frowned and looked straight ahead. Right then, the emperor's voice sounded and reverberated in all directions. The sect competition has officially begun. Chapter 312. The rules of the sect competition are the same as the previous years. There are 4 rankings: Spirit, Talisman, Elixir, and Weapon. The top 10 of each ranking will be chosen as the experts of this year's 4 rankings. The 10 people on the Spirit ranking can choose a Spirit art of their choice. The 10 people on the Talisman ranking can choose a Talisman art. The 10 people on the Elixir ranking can choose an Elixir formula. The 10 people on the Weapon ranking can choose a superior grade Spirit weapon of their choice. Of course, apart from that, there are also large amounts of Spirit stones as rewards. The Great Zhou dynasty had been established for more than 10,000 years and had accumulated many years of foundation. There were bound to be many secret skills and elixir formulas in their treasure vaults that might even be extinct. It was enough to tempt every cultivator. Most Foundation establishment cultivators used middle-grade spirit weapons. For Foundation establishment cultivators, superior-grade spirit weapons were fatally attractive as well. Of course, the most important thing was that the people on the 4 rankings could enter the ancient battlefield to train for a year. With just a few simple words from the Emperor, the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators in the square felt their blood boil and were raring to go. The Emperor declared, "Since Mr. Mo has been invited to be the judge for this sect competition, let's begin with the weapon ranking. Since Mr. Mo belongs to Misty Peak and has to enter the ancient battlefield as well, it means that everyone will have to fight for the remaining 9 spots on the weapon ranking." The Emperor's meaning was clear. Given Su Zimo's capabilities, he would be able to secure the number 1 spot on the weapon ranking, even without a competition. No one had any objections to this. Even weapon refinement masters who had been immersed in the art of weapon refinement for hundreds of years did not dare to compete with Su Zimo, let alone the young weapon refinement masters in the square. "Mr. Mo, do you have anything else to say?" the Emperor asked. Rising, Su Zimo gazed at the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators in the square with a deep gaze and said slowly, "When I arrived, I heard someone say that Misty Peak has no one who can refine weapons." At that point, the square and spectator area were in an uproar. If this was before, it was nothing much to say as it was something that everyone acknowledged. But now, they would definitely be hitting a metal plate if they said something like that. Everyone swept their gazes and saw a hint of killing intent in Su Zimo's eyes. They realized that the number one weapon refinement master of Great Zhou was about to make an example out of someone. Who said that? Come out. Su Zimo was almost standing at the top of the spectator stand, looking down at the square from above. Although his tone was calm, it revealed a domineering aura that was above all. Swish. Swish. Countless gazes fell on Tao Feng. Before this, everyone had seen the dispute between Tao Feng and Su Zimo. Tao Feng felt the pressure on his body multiply. His face was pale and terrified. Who is Mr. Mo talking about? He's from the True Fire sect. I heard that he's the number one weapon refiner of the younger generation. What a joke. Mr. Mo is only in his 20s, and he has the nerve to call himself the number one weapon refiner of the younger generation? The discussion in the crowd grew louder and louder. The crowd around True Fire sect gradually dispersed. Seeing that he was about to be isolated, Tao Feng gritted his teeth and stood out with a venomous look in his eyes. Tao Feng said hatefully, "It was me." The perfected Jin Dan from True Fire sect frowned with terrible expressions. Very good. Su Zimo nodded. Since you're so arrogant, I'm sure the standard of True Fire sect's weapon refiners has already surpassed mine. Who's so strong? Come out and let me take a look. Su Zimo's gaze swept across the seats of the perfected Jin Dan of True Fire sect with a hint of mockery. Su Zimo, don't go overboard. Elder Zhang said coldly. Overboard. Su Zimo shook his head and said indifferently, I don't think so. Compared to the unscrupulous assassination attempts of True Fire sect for the past 3 years, this is nothing. Elder Zhang was speechless. Although there was no evidence, everyone knew about it. In fact, the Emperor's notice was pasted at the entrance of True Fire Weapon Workshop back then. Su Zimo is trying to establish his dominance. Yes, it's not only for himself but also for Misty Peak. This is equivalent to taking revenge for Misty Peak. Xianyi and Lu Hui exchanged glances when they heard the discussions around them. They could see the gratification in each other's eyes. After Su Zimo appeared, they could clearly sense that the few Misty Peak disciples were in high spirits and their dejection was swept away. Su Zimo turned to Tao Feng and continued, You even said that Misty Peak's weapon refinement master is a joke. Now let me ask you, who's the joke? Tao Feng grit his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter as he trembled. His lowered face was filled with malevolence and the craziness in his eyes intensified. Su Zimo, I'm not convinced by you. Suddenly, Tao Feng raised his head and hollered with bloodshot eyes. There are more than 100,000 cultivators here. Who has seen you refine weapons personally? Who knows if you live up to your reputation? What gives you the right to occupy a spot on the spirit ranking without refining weapons? Although it seemed like Tao Feng had lost his rationality, in reality, just now, every single word he said struck at the heart. Su Zimo was only in his 20s and was only at Foundation Establishment. However, the fact that he could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons seemed like a fantasy. Even if he started refining weapons in his mother's womb, it would only take him slightly more than 20 years at most. Could he really compare to a weapon refinement master who had been immersed in the art of weapon refinement for hundreds of years? Everyone present was already confused to begin with. Now that Tao Feng said that, they were even more doubtful. Could it be that there was another expert behind Su Zimo? When it came to weapon refinement, this expert was the one who did it and Su Zimo was the only one who did it. After all, no one had seen Su Zimo refine weapons before. Many people thought about it and thought to themselves, if the ink in the word Mo Ling came from Su Zimo, could the word Ling have come from that expert? At that thought, they seemed to be getting closer to the truth. The way many cultivators looked at Su Zimo changed gradually with a hint of suspicion and scrutiny. In the blink of an eye, Tao Feng took the initiative and could not help but laugh into the skies. Su Zimo, if you have the guts, come down and compete with me. Everyone will be able to judge who's the joke. I believe that everyone wants to witness that so-called Mo clan spirit gathering technique of yours as well. The Emperor was expressionless and thought to himself, impressive. With those words, True Fire sect was in an undefeatable position. If Su Zimo lived up to his reputation, he would naturally be exposed in the next round and Tao Feng would become famous because of that. Even if Su Zimo was truly Mo Ling, there was a chance that he would make mistakes in the next round under such immense pressure in front of everyone. Furthermore, there was no loss to True Fire sect at all, and they could even watch Su Zimo's weapon refinement process. They might even be able to catch a glimpse of the secrets within. You want to learn my spirit gathering technique? Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat, and he could tell what Tao Feng's intentions were. However, he was not afraid of anyone watching or learning his spirit gathering technique. That was because no one else would be able to learn it. All the weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak had gone through such a painful experience. Anyone who learned his spirit gathering technique would be unlucky. Su Zimo, do you dare to compete? Say it. Tao Feng shouted with a provocative gaze. I won't compete with you because you're not qualified. However, Su Zimo changed the topic and said indifferently, in a while, I'll teach you how to refine spirit weapons on the spot. Learn well and don't embarrass True Fire Sect. I'll teach you. It was completely the tone and attitude of an elder guiding a junior. Everyone was dumbfounded. Chapter 313. I'll teach you weapon refinement. Against Tao Feng's challenge, a single sentence from Su Zimo widened the gap between the two of them instantly. He. Tao Feng sneered. Let's see how Mr. Mo teaches me. The Emperor waved his hand. The weapon ranking competition has officially begun. As soon as the Emperor said that, the cultivators participating in the weapon ranking competition broke away from the crowd and arrived at the sunken area in the middle of the 4 jade pillars. Tao Feng walked over and looked at Su Zimo provocatively the entire time. Go for it, Senior Brother Shui. Junior Brother Shui, go on. With Junior Brother Su around, go all out without any pressure. Under the encouragement of Little Fatty, Lung Ro and the others, Shui arrived at the sunken area as well. He was filled with confidence and was in a perfect state. Shui knew that he might even be able to perform exceptionally in such a state. Su Zimo sat high above without moving and watched everything quietly without any intention of getting up. No matter what, he was the judge appointed by the Emperor and his position was unshakable. There were no restrictions on what spirit weapons each person could refine in the weapon ranking competition. However, there were only 3 rounds. Within the 3 rounds, they would choose the spirit weapon of the highest grade and quality to participate in the final evaluation. If they failed all 3 rounds, it would mean that they would be disqualified. There were a total of 1,072 weapon refinement masters vying for a spot in Weapon Peak for this sect competition, and they were all in their positions in the sunken area. Almost at the same time, the 1,000-odd weapon refinement masters took out their weapon tripods and placed them in front of them. Swoosh! Instantly, countless flames rose and intertwined. Some of them were level 1 spirit fires while some had already cultivated level 3 spirit fires. Cauldron warming. Those who could participate in the sect competition were all elites of their respective sects, and were naturally extremely familiar with the process of weapon refinement. Many cultivators had already chosen their materials. After warming, they placed the materials into the weapon tripods, and increased the temperature of the flames to begin smelting. At this step, the higher the grade of the flame, the more impurities it could refine. Shui had already cultivated a level 2 spirit fire, while Tao Feng's flame was the highest grade, level 3 spirit fire. Time passed slowly. The first to complete the smelting was Tao Feng. The next step was to sculpt. The next step was tempering. Many cultivators in the spectator area and square were already attracted by Tao Feng's weapon refinement, and nodded their heads secretly. It had to be said that Tao Feng's refining skills were indeed far superior to others. At the age of 30, to have such understanding and attainments in refining was truly rare. But then, another name flashed through everyone's mind. They couldn't help but look sideways at Su Zimo, who was sitting at the top. At this time, Su Zimo's expression was calm. Tao Feng's brilliant refining technique seemed to have no effect on him at all. Hey! Just as everyone was attracted by the thousands of weapon refinement masters in the square, Demoness Ji sneaked to Su Zimo's side and blew into his ear, calling out seductively. Su Zimo was expressionless and motionless. When Demoness Ji caught sight of Su Zimo's slightly stiff body and flushed face, she could not help but purse her lips and chuckle coquettishly. Second young Master Su, you're so biased. Su Zimo's mouth twitched and he looked around with an unnatural expression. He heaved a sigh of relief when he realized that no one was paying attention to them. Demoness Ji stuck close to Su Zimo and whispered, I heard that you were the one who custom-made my sister's robe? Yes, Su Zimo was helpless and could only tell the truth. I want one too. Demoness Ji said coquettishly, I don't have a suitable set of clothes yet. Look, the one I'm wearing right now doesn't fit at all. Su Zimo glanced over instinctively and caught sight of her snow-white chest. Hurriedly, Su Zimo turned around and took a deep breath of air. Closing his eyes, he composed himself. Unknowingly, Su Zimo broke out in cold sweat and looked wretched. This demoness, even though Su Zimo knew that it was merely Demoness Ji's seduction methods, he could not do anything to her. Furthermore, the emperor was right behind him and Ji Yaoshua was right beside him. An indescribable sense of excitement tugged at his heart continuously, and he almost could not control himself. Right then, in the sunken area, Tao Feng had already completed his tempering and was beginning to gather spirit energy. Before long, Tao Feng condensed his first spirit pattern. True Fire Sect Sima Ji nodded silently. He had witnessed Tao Feng's weapon refinement process without any mistakes, and there was a high chance that he could refine a superior-grade spirit weapon. After 10 minutes, another spirit light shone. A second spirit pattern. It was already a middle-grade spirit weapon, but Tao Feng had no intention of stopping. A moment later, the third spirit pattern shone right in front of everyone. 3 spirit patterns, a superior-grade spirit weapon. It was only then that Tao Feng heaved a sigh of relief. Prior to this, his failure rate for superior-grade spirit weapons was extremely high. The fact that he succeeded today meant that he was in a good state. In the first round of weapon refinement, Tao Feng ensured that he could refine a superior-grade spirit weapon first before going all out for the next 2 rounds. Quenching and forming. A superior-grade spirit weapon was produced. A series of exclamations broke out from the crowd. In the past sect competitions, there were very few people who could refine superior-grade spirit weapons. The fact that Tao Feng could refine a superior-grade spirit weapon on his first try was enough to prove his standards as a weapon refinement master. Tao Feng looked at Su Zimo. Initially, he wanted to brag about it. However, he realized that Su Zimo was leaning against the chair with his eyes closed and was not looking at him at all. As time passed by, all the weapon refinement masters completed their first round of weapon refinement. Some succeeded while others failed. Shui succeeded in refining an inferior-grade spirit weapon. Shui was in no hurry to refine a middle-grade spirit weapon. In the first round of weapon refinement, he wanted to familiarize himself with the feeling of weapon refinement and regain his peak state. The 1,000-odd weapon refinement masters rested for a moment before preparing for the second round of weapon refinement. Right then, Su Zimo, who was seated high above, suddenly opened his eyes. 2 bedazzling lights shone before fading away quickly and returning to calmness. Many perfected beings. Jin Dan sensed something and turned to look. True Fire Sect Sima Ji said in an eccentric manner, Oh, Mr. Mo, are you prepared to make a move? Mr. Mo, as the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, you can't possibly be trying to fool us with a superior-grade spirit weapon, right? Elder Zhang sneered. Both of them had lived for hundreds of years and their eyelashes were hollow. Naturally, they knew that a person's mental state would have a huge impact on weapon refinement. That was the reason why both of them were constantly provoking him with their words. Right then, Tao Feng raised his voice. The great Mr. Mo probably doesn't need to refine 3 rounds. I heard that the success rate of the Mo clan spirit gathering technique is extremely high. Given Mr. Mo's capabilities, a single round is enough. Pressure. Continuous pressure. As long as Su Zimo's emotions were fluctuating, there would definitely be problems during the weapon refinement process. However, in the eyes of Su Zimo, the people of True Fire Sect were like clowns. His spirit gathering technique had nothing to do with one state. After 3 years of accumulation, Su Zimo's momentum was already set. The doubts and mockery of the outside world could not shake his mind at all. You're right, a single round is enough. Su Zimo smiled indifferently. Tao Feng, everyone from True Fire Sect, take a good look at what weapon refinement is. Chapter 314. Boom! Arriving at the center of the spectator area, Su Zimo took out his weapon tripod from his storage bag and slammed it on the ground with a loud bang. At that moment, it was not only Tao Feng and everyone from True Fire Sect. The 100,000-odd cultivators in the square, and the 1,000-odd Jin Dan perfected beings at the spectator area, all had their gazes fixed on Su Zimo. The pressure was so immense that ordinary people would not be able to understand it. In everyone's eyes, regardless of whether Su Zimo had true capabilities or not, he was too young. If his mental state and willpower were not firm enough and he showed even the slightest bit of fear, there would definitely be huge problems during weapon refinement. With an indifferent expression, Su Zimo gathered a scarlet flame in his palm and began warming the tripod. After it was done, Su Zimo took out pieces of spirit ores that emitted rich spirit chi from his storage bag and tossed them into the weapon tripod. Heavens, that's purple feather rock. That handful of sand is dark and lusterless. It seems to be lusterless sand. Look, there's ice silkworm steel, pure gold crystal, and mystic thunder jade. A series of exclamations could be heard from the crowd. These spiritual ores were extremely rare materials. Any one of them could be used as a core material to refine a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. But now Su Zimo had placed all those rare spirit ores together. What was he trying to refine? That question surfaced in everyone's minds uncontrollably. The more rare spirit ores were fused, the more difficult it would be to refine a spirit weapon. There were very few weapon refinement masters who would take such a risk. Before long, all the spirit ores were tossed into the weapon tripod. Swoosh! Flames rose and began to burn the spirit ores in the weapon tripod. Time passed bit by bit. After the smelting was done, it was time for molding. Under the attentive gazes of countless people, a spiritual weapon gradually took shape. Everyone's eyes gradually widened as astonishment appeared on their faces. What's that? A saber? Holy F***ck. Isn't that saber way too big? It even has a hilt. Not only does it consume a lot of spiritual energy to wield such a big thing, it's also very inconvenient and clumsy. Even if I could refine it, it would be useless. Within Su Zimo's weapon tripod, a saber gradually took form. It was half the height of a person and its blade was extremely wide, even wider than an adult's palm. The back of the saber was thick and heavy. In the past 3 years, Su Zimo had forged too many spirit weapons. There were hundreds of supreme-grade spiritual weapons. However, Su Zimo had never refined a suitable long saber for himself. At this moment, Su Zimo felt that the time had come. A man from True Fire Sect said, "This saber has a hilt. It should have been refined for him." It said that this lad's close combat strength is not bad. The person who spoke had a cold gaze. He looked at Su Zimo with a trace of killing intent. His name was He Jiang, and he was a legacy disciple of the True Fire Sect. His younger brother, He Xing, was the alchemist who had died at the hands of Su Zimo. "It's a pity that he forgot something," Tao Feng sneered. "With so many rare spirit ores fused together, even if all the impurities are removed, the weight of this saber will reach a frightening level. At that time, he probably won't even be able to lift it." Su Zimo was satisfied as he looked at the spirit saber that was gradually taking form. He had divine strength but did not know any saber techniques. That was the reason why he had created such a clumsy and gigantic spirit saber. That way, the spirit saber that was already heavy and ferocious to begin with would be able to release an extremely terrifying attack, when coupled with his strong physique and terrifying blood chi. The forging was done and tempering began. Su Zimo's spirit energy condensed into a pair of gigantic hands that entered the weapon tripod. His fingers turned into hammers and struck the saber repeatedly, letting out a series of crisp sounds. Cling! Clang! A moment later, the expressions of many weapon refinement masters present changed. Although they were hidden by the weapon tripod and could not see Su Zimo's tempering technique, the interval between each strike was exactly the same and the frequency was the same. It was as though it was calculated precisely. Many Jin Dan perfected beings had already realized that Su Zimo was Mr. Mo without a doubt. Ordinary weapon refinement masters would not be able to master a tempering technique as such. Furthermore, from material selection to tempering, Su Zimo's movements were as smooth as flowing water. It was like a habit that was filled with beauty. Sima Ji sneered internally and scoffed. "So what if you're Mr. Mo? When we see your spirit gathering technique later on, we might be able to uncover the secret within." After a long time, the tempering ended. A thin layer of sweat appeared on Su Zimo's forehead as well. With so many spirit ores fused together, the difficulty of his tempering increased significantly as well. After tempering, it was time for the core of weapon refinement. Spirit gathering. Su Zimo could clearly sense that Sima Ji and the others from True Fire Sect had suddenly turned nervous and were staring at him intently. Su Zimo chuckled. You want to see my spirit gathering technique? Sure, I'll let you guys see it clearly. Right after, in front of everyone, Su Zimo suddenly did something. He removed the weapon tripod. Apart from Misty Peak, who had expected it and were relatively calm, the other cultivators were shocked. Perfected being Jean Dan, who was closest to Su Zimo, had a change in expression and wanted to dodge instinctively. However, on second thought, everyone realized that something was amiss and coughed gently to calm down. Without any protection, Su Zimo began spirit gathering. When he saw that, even the emperor frowned, not understanding the deeper meaning behind Su Zimo's actions. It was way too risky to remove the weapon tripod for spirit gathering. If he failed to condense the first spirit pattern, it would at most be equivalent to the explosion of a pseudo-spirit weapon with limited lethality. However, if he failed to condense the fourth spirit pattern, the explosion of the spirit weapon would be equivalent to the explosion of a superior-grade spirit weapon with terrifying power. Even if the weapon refinement master was perfected being Jean Dan, he would be severely injured if he was caught off guard. Ji Yaoshua frowned slightly and pursed her red lips with a hint of worry in her eyes. Sister, don't worry. He's Mr. Mo, he'll definitely be fine. Right then, Demoness Ji came over and held Ji Yaoshua's slightly cold hands, consoling her with a smile. Ji Yaoshua forced a smile, but the worry in her eyes did not lessen at all. Whoosh! Right then a spirit light shone. The first spirit pattern was successfully condensed. Su Zimo did not stop and continued to condense the second spirit pattern. Everyone held their breaths and continued watching. A moment later, another spirit light flashed. The second spirit pattern was successfully condensed. A series of gasps could be heard from the crowd. Ji Yaoshua's palms were filled with sweat. Although Su Zimo had already condensed 2 spirit patterns in succession, she was even more nervous. Prior to this, if the spirit gathering failed, Su Zimo would only lose face. However, if something went wrong later on and the spirit gathering failed, he would lose his life. Ji Yaoshua would rather Su Zimo fail in the first 2 spirit patterns than for him to be injured. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Su Zimo had already started condensing the third spirit pattern. Chapter 315. It was clear that Su Zimo took a longer time to condense the third spirit pattern. Right from the beginning, everyone from True Fire Sect, including Tao Feng, had been observing Su Zimo's every move of spirit gathering carefully, unwilling to miss out on a single detail. However, they did not gain much from their observation. They merely noticed that Su Zimo's spirit gathering process was not completed in one go, but intermittent. At times, he had already begun spirit gathering. However, for some unknown reason, Su Zimo would suddenly give up and gather spirit again. There was no pattern to the cycle at all. What's that? Even though Sima Ji and the others had refined weapons for hundreds of years, they had never seen such a strange spirit gathering technique. Whoosh! A spirit light burst forth and was a little blinding. Just as everyone was confused, the third spirit pattern was successfully condensed. Swoosh! Xianyi and Lu Hui heaved a sigh of relief and exchanged glances with lingering fear. Although they had heard of Su Zimo's strange spirit gathering technique in Misty Peak, that was 3 years ago. Furthermore, at that time, Su Zimo could only refine inferior-grade spirit weapons, and it was relatively easy for him to condense a single spirit pattern. Now, Su Zimo had already condensed 3 spirit patterns. Ji Yaoshua relaxed slightly and heaved a sigh of relief as well. At that moment, the expressions of perfected being Jean Dan, who were on both sides of Su Zimo, changed slightly, and they felt uneasy. When they saw that Su Zimo had no intention of stopping after condensing the third spirit pattern, some of the perfected being Jean Dan could not hold on and retreated hurriedly. At that moment, if the spirit gathering failed, it would be equivalent to the explosion of a superior-grade spirit weapon. Perfected being Jean Dan, who was not strong enough, would be injured on the spot and would be in an even more wretched state. There was no need for them to hold on for the sake of their dignity. Of course, there were some perfected being Jean Dan who pretended to be calm and did not leave because of their strength. On the surface, those people were watching Su Zimo refine weapons calmly. However, in reality, they were already tense and had their palms on their storage bags. The moment they noticed anything amiss, they would crush their protection talismans and flee the scene immediately. Just as everyone was feeling uneasy, a blinding spirit light burst forth once more. Ah! Cries of surprise could be heard from the spectator stands in the square. The fourth spiritual pattern. No one had expected that the fourth spirit pattern would be successfully condensed not long after the third spirit pattern was condensed. For spirit patterns, a supreme grade spirit artifact. Up until now, no one dared to question Suzimo's ability in equipment refinement anymore. To be able to condense 4 spirit patterns without the protection of the weapon tripod, how confident was he in his spirit-gathering skill? Everyone from True Fire Sect frowned. The situation was completely different from what they had expected. Through Suzimo's artifact refining, they couldn't see anything special about it. Tao Feng glared at Suzimo coldly. Gritting his teeth, he thought to himself, a supreme-grade spirit weapon? I'll give it a shot later. It's still unknown who will win or lose. Congratulations, congratulations. Congratulations, Mr. Amo. Another supreme-grade spirit weapon has been created. Taoist Master Jin Dan, who had just now dodged, hurriedly returned and cupped his fists in congratulations. Unexpectedly, Suzimo acted as though he did not hear anything. The spirit saber hovered in midair and the spirit chi in the surroundings had yet to dissipate. However, Suzimo's gaze was fixed on the ball of spirit chi. To think that it would condense spirit once more. Everyone was stunned. What was Suzimo trying to do? Right now, it was already a 4-pattern supreme-grade spirit weapon. If it were to condense spirit once more, it would be a perfect spirit weapon. Suzimo was going to refine a perfect spirit weapon. The crowd was in an uproar. Pust! At the spectator area, many perfected beings Jin Dan gasped in shock. The few perfected beings Jin Dan had just returned and cupped their fists in congratulations. However, before they could stabilize themselves, they fled at an even faster speed. That's AF * King Lunatic. He's truly courting death. Without the protection of the weapon tripod, how dare he forcefully condense the 5th spirit pattern? The group of perfected beings Jin Dan who were pretending to be calm could no longer sit still. With pale faces, they stood up one after another and distanced themselves from Suzimo. What a joke! If the spirit gathering failed right now, it would be equivalent to the explosion of a supreme-grade spirit weapon. At such a close distance, they would most likely be doomed even if they used their protection talismans. As for the weapon refinement master himself, he would be blown to smithereens. Ji Yaoshua's heart skipped a beat. She had just calmed down, but her heart skipped a beat once more. She frowned slightly as well. She had not expected that Suzimo would go this far. The Emperor and Chief Steward Gu Shi of Sky Treasure Auction House had complicated gazes. Apart from worry, there was more admiration. Although the two of them did not know how to refine weapons, in their opinion, if Suzimo wanted to refine a perfect spirit weapon, this was indeed the best opportunity. That was because the momentum was already set, and he was blessed with fortune. For the past 3 years, Suzimo would spend a certain amount of time every day to refine weapons without slacking, and his weapon refinement skills were improving steadily as well. Later on, Suzimo realized that it was truly way too difficult to refine a perfect spirit weapon. Perfection meant that there were no flaws at all. In terms of spirit gathering, Suzimo had no problems. However, there were 6 steps to weapon refinement. Every single step of the 6 steps had to be flawless in order to refine a perfect spirit weapon. The perfection of every single step was not only dependent on the weapon refinement master's skills, but also on one's mentality, state, and even the external environment. In fact, there was even a hint of fortune. Fortune was something that was ethereal and could only be chanced upon. Suzimo had been searching for that inexplicable feeling the entire time. Along the way, Suzimo could vaguely sense an opportunity. Therefore, when he decided to refine a weapon, he had already decided that he was going to refine a perfect spirit weapon this time round. The first 4 steps of weapon refinement, material selection, smelting, molding, and tempering, were extremely smooth without any flaws. In terms of spirit gathering, Suzimo could do it with a 100% success rate. Today, that perfect grade spirit saber was definitely going to be refined. At that thought, Suzimo felt much more relaxed. Everyone from True Fire Sect, Do you guys want to know the secret of the Emo clan's spirit gathering technique? Just as everyone was tensed up, Su Zimo suddenly asked. Everyone was dumbfounded and their jaws nearly dropped to the ground. Which weapon refinement master would not give it their all during an exciting segment like spirit gathering? Yet, Su Zimo was still in the mood to speak? Su Zimo continued, actually, the secret of the Emo clan's spirit gathering technique is very simple. It's to remove one's weapon tripod during spirit gathering and place oneself in a dead end. That way, one can better gather fortune and increase the success rate of spirit gathering. His words were half true and half false. It was true that one had to remove the weapon tripod, but it had nothing to do with fortune. What a load of nonsense! Sima Ji sneered. To him, those words were filled with loopholes and made no sense at all. Su Zimo smiled indifferently and did not refute. In his opinion, the people from True Fire Sect would definitely believe it. That was because most of the time, people were more willing to believe what they saw with their own eyes, even if it was fake. Right then, a bedazzling light burst forth like a blazing sun, filling the skies and illuminating the void such that everyone could not open their eyes. The fifth spirit pattern was successfully condensed. Chapter 316. 5 Spirit Patterns, a Perfect Spirit Weapon. In front of Su Zimo, a bedazzling light burst forth like the first rays of dawn, filling the entire square. The light paused for a moment before retracting rapidly into the saber. No one spoke. The square and the spectator stands were completely silent. Everyone's gazes were drawn to the gigantic spirit saber that was hovering in midair. Their mouths were agape and they were shocked. Even though the spirit saber looked cumbersome and had a handle that did not make sense, it was still a perfect-grade spirit weapon after all. Even perfected being Jean Dan, who had lived for hundreds of years, might not be able to witness the creation of a perfect spirit weapon in his entire life. How lucky were they to be able to witness it with their own eyes? Perfected being Yun Shan's gaze was burning. Southern Mountain Sect was known for their body tempering and melee combat strength. In the hands of others, the power that the spirit saber could unleash was limited. However, in his hands it was definitely a terrifying killing weapon. That perfect-grade spirit saber had a fatal attraction for him. Everyone from True Fire Sect was shocked at first before confusion appeared in their eyes. Even weapon refinement masters like Sima Ji and Elder Zhang, who had been immersed in the art of weapon refinement for hundreds of years, could not understand what was going on. Logically speaking, Su Zimo's explanation of removing the weapon tripod was complete bullshit. However, the truth was right before their eyes and they had no choice but to reconsider. Perhaps removing the weapon tripod could truly condense providence and increase the success rate of spirit gathering? After all, that was a method that no one had tried before. Perhaps this was truly an undiscovered secret of the weapon refinement world? However, on second thought, if it was truly that simple, why would Su Zimo reveal the secret so honestly without hiding anything? No matter how they thought about it, they could not figure it out. However, the truth was that after removing the weapon tripod, Su Zimo managed to condense 5 spirit patterns. Looking at the spirit saber that was hovering in midair, Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief and revealed a radiant smile. That refinement process had expended a large amount of spirit energy, mental state and energy. Right now he was completely exhausted and almost on the verge of collapsing, drenched in sweat. There was only one last step left. The spirit saber would be completely refined. Su Zimo waved his sleeves, and the spirit saber that had just condensed 5 blades moved horizontally, falling into the cold water that had been prepared long ago. The 6th step was quenching. Normally, when a spirit saber that had been burned red fell into cold water, its temperature would drop rapidly, and it would emit billowing green smoke and an ear-piercing sound. During the exchange of hot and cold, the internal structure of the spirit saber would change and become tougher. The spirit patterns would also completely merge with the saber, becoming indistinguishable. But now, when the spirit saber crafted by Su Zimo fell into the cold water, there was no sizzling sound or green smoke. How could this be? Su Zimo's expression changed slightly and he frowned. At this moment, a change occurred in the cold water. The surface of the water was emitting warm white steam, and bubbles began to appear. It was boiling. The basin of water did not quench the flames on the spirit saber. Instead, It was heated up by the heat emitted by the saber and boiled. Gurgle gurgle. The surface of the water was boiling. In the spectator stands, many Jean Dan perfected cultivators stood up and craned their necks to watch. Ha 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 ha. Right then Sima Ji burst into laughter. His eyes were filled with mockery as he shouted, Su Zimo, oh Su Zimo, your perfect spirit weapon is going to be wasted. It's not going to belong to you at the end of the day. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he stared at the boiling water with a dark gaze. No one knew what he was thinking about. What's going on? Someone whispered. Sima Ji replied smugly, if you want to refine a perfect spirit weapon, you can't make any mistakes in the 6 steps of weapon refinement. If you want to refine a saber with 5 spirit patterns, there's no way you can succeed with this ordinary cold water. Su Zimo sighed internally. He knew that Sima Ji was right. He had not considered this matter thoroughly. Of course he could not be blamed entirely. In all the ancient weapon refinement manuals in Misty Peak, there was no mention of what one had to take note of in order to refine a perfect spirit weapon. Who would have thought that countless years later, a disciple of Misty Peak would attempt to refine a perfect spirit weapon? Sima Ji declared with a mocking expression, if you want to refine a perfect spirit weapon, you'll have to use the rarest and most supreme grade spirit liquids such as Northern Frost Ice, Deep Sea Fiend Oil or Empyrean Spring Water. It's a pity that you don't have any of those things, ha ha. Many Jean Dan perfected cultivators were secretly shocked. Every single one of the 3 items mentioned by Sima Ji were extremely valuable, and were not any lower than supreme-grade spirit weapons. To think that they would only be used for quenching. Su Zimo pulled the spirit saber out of the boiling water expressionlessly and did not do anything else. When they saw that, everyone knew that Su Zimo did not prepare those things beforehand and could not help but sigh. Seeing that a perfect spirit artifact was about to be born, he didn't expect to fall at the last step. Ugh! Xianyi sighed with a pained expression. Ji Yaoshua looked at the silent Su Zimo and felt her heart ache. She turned her head hurriedly and shouted, Father, help him! The emperor said in a deep voice, Mingzhe, head to the palace's treasury. There should be Empyrean spring water there. It's already too late. Sima Ji pointed at the spirit saber in Su Zimo's hands and sneered. If there's no quenching item in 5 breaths' time, that saber will be crippled. Everyone focused their gazes and saw that the spirit patterns on the fiery red saber were already showing signs of dissipating. It was already too late to retrieve the Empyrean spring water. Su Zimo, you're still too young, fufufu. Sima Ji laughed. He was overjoyed because Su Zimo's fortune would dissipate with this failure, and it would be difficult for him to refine perfect spirit weapons in the future. This failure was not only a saber that was crippled, but also a monstrous weapon refinement master. Ji Yaoshua stood up and was prepared to console Su Zimo. Right then, Su Zimo narrowed his eyes and a strange glint flashed through them. Suddenly he gripped the saber in his hands tightly, and held it horizontally in front of his chest with the blade facing downwards. Su Zimo reached out and the blade landed on his palm, slicing across it slowly and forcefully. Since there's no Northern Frost Ice, Deep Sea Fiend Oil or Empyrean Spring Water, I'll use my blood to refine this spirit saber. Sima Ji sneered in disdain. How foolish. How can your blood compare to the Empyrean? Sima Ji couldn't continue. His eyes were wide open and his face was filled with disbelief. How could this be? His bloodline. Poof! Poof! Blood spewed out from the blade and splattered on the fiery red saber. Shing! An ear-piercing sound echoed and thick smoke billowed from the saber. The temperature of the saber plummeted and the spirit patterns that were about to dissipate stabilized and fused with the saber. Furthermore, the 5 spirit patterns were even devouring Su Zimo's blood vaguely. Although the temperature of the saber had plummeted, the color of the saber was gradually deepening. From the fiery red color of the spirit fire, it was gradually turning into a blood-like scarlet. 6-step quenching was a success. Clang! 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 The saber trembled and let out a series of intense buzzes. It was filled with a thick blood stench that made one uneasy. Su Zimo caressed the saber gently and murmured, Since you're refined with my blood, from this day forth you'll be called blood quenching. As though it was sentient, the saber quietened down. A perfect spirit weapon, blood quenching, was born. Chapter 317. This turn of events was completely out of everyone's expectations. Nobody knew how terrifying the power contained within Su Zimo's bloodline was. Su Zimo cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness and the Void Thunder Manual. He even devoured a dragon and cultivated his bloodline to the Tsunami Blood Realm. His bloodline was much stronger than the Zenith Spring Water. Everyone from True Fire Sect was dumbfounded. Could a person's bloodline compare to rare spirit liquids such as the Northern Frost Ice and Zenith Spring Water? Before that doubt could be resolved, everyone's gazes and minds were drawn to the newly born blood quencher once more. The gigantic and thick saber was scarlet and blinding. 5 patterns were imprinted on the saber like 5 blood grooves. It was menacing and terrifying, resembling 5 narrow blood eyes. Even though the saber was merely placed there quietly, it exuded an iron-blooded killing aura. Sima Ji rubbed his chin and murmured, "This saber is fused with so many rare spirit ores. Now that it's refined to perfection with 5 patterns, the power of this saber should not be inferior to Khanate spirit weapons." When they heard that, everyone looked at Blood Quencher with even more fervent and greedy gazes. If supreme-grade spirit weapons were enough to move the hearts of every perfected Jin Dan, then, in that case, a perfect spirit artifact could trigger a bloody battle. If they were not in the capital of Great Zhou and beneath the Emperor's feet, the many perfected Jin Dan cultivators would have already attacked and engaged in a chaotic battle. Sensing the gazes around him and the unusual feeling in the air, Su Zimo understood. A man's wealth was his own ruin. With a flip of his palm, Su Zimo put Blood Quencher away into his storage bag. "Mr. Imo, how much are you selling this saber for? Name a price." Right then, perfected being Yun Shan stood up and asked. "That's right, Mr. Imo. It's a rare opportunity. Why don't you auction this saber here? It'll definitely fetch a good price," another perfected Jin Dan cultivator said. Su Zimo shook his head. "This saber is priceless." Although the perfect spirit weapon was successfully refined, he could not guarantee that he would be able to refine Blood Quencher again if he had to do it all over again. Similar to Khanate spirit weapons, perfect spirit weapons were priceless treasures. Furthermore, Blood Quencher was stained with his blood. "Mr. Imo, you must be joking. Everything has a price." Perfected being Yun Shan's refused to give up. "Mr. Mo's cultivation realms, let's not talk about it. You might as well sell it." Su Zimo frowned and said impatiently, "I'm sorry, priceless means that it's not for sale." Perfected being Yun Shan's expression darkened. If this was before, he would definitely not choose to become enemies with Su Zimo. Perfecteds of the worlds of Jin Dan means. Sima Ji and perfected being Song Lang exchanged glances. Both of them could see the cold glint in the other's eyes. Su Zimo returned to his seat and gripped a superior-grade spirit stone in his right hand, recovering the spirit energy in his body slowly. He had already set the bait and was waiting for the fish to take the bait. In the square, the 1,000 weapon refinement masters began their second round of weapon refinement. Just now, Su Zimo's weapon refinement had a huge impact on these weapon refinement masters. However, most people were paying attention to Su Zimo's spirit gathering technique. Misty Peak Shui, on the other hand, was observing Su Zimo's tempering technique. That was because he knew that Su Zimo's spirit gathering technique was useless even if others learned it. After comprehending for a moment, Shui felt that he had gained a lot and his confidence was boosted as he began his second round of weapon refinement. Tao Feng, who had refined a superior-grade spirit weapon in the first round, was conflicted. Intuitively and theoretically, he felt that removing the weapon tripod was courting death. However, the truth was that Su Zimo had indeed refined a perfect spirit weapon. After hesitating for a long time, Tao Feng took a deep breath and decided to believe in his weapon refinement technique to begin his second round of weapon refinement. Because he had already refined a superior-grade spirit weapon in the first round, Tao Feng's position on the weapon ranking was already set in stone. Therefore, Tao Feng decided to try refining a supreme-grade spirit weapon for the next 2 rounds. Material selection, smelting, molding, tempering. Everything was done in one go. Following his own method, Tao Feng began spirit gathering under the protection of the weapon tripod. First spirit pattern. Second spirit pattern. Third spirit pattern failed. Tao Feng's expression was terrible. Su Zimo's weapon refinement had affected his mental state immensely. If he were to follow his previous method, he might not even be able to refine a superior-grade spirit weapon. Should I give it a try? What if removing the weapon tripod really increases the success rate of spirit gathering? Similar thoughts appeared in Tao Feng's mind repeatedly and could not be dismissed. The more he wanted to restrain himself, the more he could not. Forget it, I'll give it a try. Since I've already refined a superior-grade spirit weapon, it doesn't matter even if I fail. At that thought, Tao Feng began his third round of weapon refinement. Material selection, smelting, molding, tempering. At the fifth step, spirit gathering, Tao Feng suddenly removed the weapon tripod. That action naturally attracted the attention of countless people. Look, Tao Feng has removed the weapon tripod too. Someone's finally trying it. We'll know if this method works in a while. Taking a deep breath, Tao Feng tried his best to maintain a calm state of mind and adjust to his optimal state before slowly attempting spirit gathering. Whoosh! With a flash of light, the first spirit pattern was successfully condensed. Soon after, another flash of light and the second spirit pattern was successfully condensed. A moment later, another flash of light. The third spirit pattern was successfully condensed as well. Ah! A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. Seems like Su Zimo was right. Removing the weapon tripod can truly increase the success rate of spirit gathering. Tao Feng became excited as well and his eyes shone. As long as I condense another spirit pattern, I'll be able to obtain a supreme-grade spirit weapon. At that thought, Tao Feng attempted spirit gathering once more. Right then, Sima Ji, who was at the spectator area, vaguely sensed that something was amiss and instinctively looked towards Su Zimo. At that moment, Su Zimo was watching everything calmly with a faint smile on his lips. Not good. Sima Ji was alarmed and was about to turn around. Boom! In the square, a deafening sound was heard. Tao Feng fell to the ground with his eyes shut. He had already fainted and his body was riddled with holes from the shattered sword shards, bleeding profusely. In Tao Feng's hands was a shattered talisman. It was not hard to imagine that without that protection talisman, Tao Feng would have been blasted into meat paste. Even if Tao Feng managed to survive, it would be difficult for him to recover within a short period of time, let alone enter the ancient battlefield with the people of the 4 ranking lists. This meant that even though Tao Feng left his name on the weapon ranking, his slot to enter the ancient battlefield was empty. Su Zimo, you schemed against True Fire Sect. Sima Ji bolted upright and glared at Su Zimo without concealing the killing intent in his eyes. He's just willing to take the bait. Su Zimo smiled indifferently. The disciples of True Fire Sect are truly adorably silly. Chapter 318. After the matter was over, Su Zimo no longer paid attention to the sect competition in the square. Gripping spirit stones in each hand, he calmed himself down to recover his spirit energy and adjust his state. Although he exhausted his spirit energy and mental state to refine Blood Quencher this time round, his stagnant cultivation realm was showing signs of breaking through. Right now, Su Zimo was at late-stage foundation establishment and was just a step away from perfected foundation establishment. Close to noon, the weapon refinement segment ended and the rankings of the weapon ranking were out. Although Shui did not manage to leave his name on the weapon ranking, he gained some insights from watching Su Zimo's weapon refinement process and successfully refined a middle-grade spirit weapon as well. He was extremely excited. In another 10 years, he would have a chance to compete for a spot on the weapon ranking as well. The jade pillar of the weapon ranking at the northwest corner shone with a mysterious and resplendent light as names appeared one after another. Su Zimo was at the top. After the weapon ranking competition ended, the talisman ranking competition took a short break. For the talisman ranking competition, Misty Peak sent out Lung Ro. Lung Ro was not weak to begin with and was already a 3-Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. She was even more talented in talismans and was the only person from Misty Peak who was confident of leaving her name on the talisman ranking this time round. Indeed, after the talisman ranking competition ended, Lung Ro suppressed the crowd and her name was at the top of the jade pillar at the southwest corner of the talisman ranking. To begin with, Lung Ro's appearance was cold and otherworldly, like a fairy that had descended to the mortal realm. Naturally, she attracted even more gazes of admiration now that she was at the top of the talisman ranking. Shui smiled. Congratulations, junior sister Lung. Sister, you're amazing. Both you and bro managed to get first place. Little Fatty raised his thumb and praised. Lung Ro replied with an indifferent expression, as though the fact that she was number 1 of Talisman Peak did not cause much of a stir in her heart. Chun Mengqi did not know why, but when she saw this scene she felt uncomfortable. At the spectator area, many perfected Jin Dan thanked and toasted Xianyi and Lu Hui one after another. Congratulations, congratulations. Double first place as expected of Misty Peak. Xianyi pretended to be reserved and said humbly, You flatter me, you flatter me. It's all luck. Although he said that, Xianyi's heart was already blooming with joy, and he felt that his face was glowing. Lu Hui added, We didn't bring many disciples with us this time round. There's no hope for us to get into the elixir and spirit rankings after this. Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. Misty Peak has already taken first place in both rankings. After the grand competition, their name will be known throughout the Great Zhou dynasty. Another Taoist Jin Dan hurriedly said. In reality, Xianyi and Xianyi both knew that these Jin Dan perfected cultivators had come to express their thanks partly because of the double role champion, but mostly because of Su Zimo. A portion of the cultivators still held the mentality of befriending a tool refiner, who could refine a perfect spirit tool. True Fire Sect had tried to assassinate Su Zimo multiple times. This was a grudge that was hard to resolve. The feud between perfected being Song Lang and Su Zimo was even deeper. Sima Ji and the others from True Fire Sect and perfected being Song Lang of Iridescent Cloud's palace were expressionless. Occasionally, a cold glint would flash through their eyes as they looked at Su Zimo. Occasionally, they would exchange glances. No one knew what they were plotting. Perfected being Yun Shan of Southern Mountain Sect frowned in deep thought. Right then, Su Zimo, who was initially resting with his eyes closed, shuddered all of a sudden. His aura surged and the spirit energy within his body surged, ready to burst out. Everyone sensed something and turned to look. He had broken through? Perfected Foundation establishment. Xianyi and Lu Hui nodded in delight. A moment later, Su Zimo's eyes were still closed. The spirit energy within his body surged, forming a storm that showed no signs of calming down. Instead, it was getting more intense. He's going to unlock his spirit meridian directly. Throughout history, there were often monster incarnates who could make use of the momentum of their breakthrough to unlock a spirit meridian, the moment they broke through to perfected foundation establishment. Of course, it was extremely difficult and less than 1 in 10,000 people could unlock a spirit meridian at perfected foundation establishment. Even those with heaven or variant spirit roots would find it difficult to do so, unless they cultivated some unique secret skills. Perfected being Song Lang's heart skipped a beat. This was a rare opportunity. If he could secretly interrupt Su Zimo's breakthrough process, he would be able to deal a severe blow to the latter's foundation and his future cultivation path would be crippled. As the name suggested, foundation establishment was the process of building one's foundation. It was extremely important and that was the reason why there was the saying of unlocking the 8 meridians. The more spirit meridians one unlocked, the more stable their foundation would be, and the greater their chances of breaking through to Jin Dan. In fact, they might even be able to create a Jin Dan phenomenon. If something went wrong during the foundation establishment process, half of their cultivation path would be crippled. As perfected being Song Lang pondered, the emperor suddenly waved his sleeves and pulled Su Zimo to his side along with his chair in front of everyone, placing him down gently. Throughout the entire process, Su Zimo was not disturbed in the slightest. The meaning of that action was clear. It was to tell those with ulterior motives to forget about targeting Su Zimo. The emperor was expressionless as he looked towards Iridescent Cloud's palace. Feeling guilty, perfected being Song Lang retracted his gaze after making eye contact with the emperor. Boom! Suddenly a dull thud sounded from Su Zimo's body. Under the cover of his green robes, a spirit meridian was faintly discernible and shone with a bedazzling brilliance. It had only been dozens of breaths and he had already unlocked a spirit meridian. Xianyi nodded silently. That was the benefit of cultivating ethereal foundation establishment. In the past, there were even people in the sect who unlocked 2 spirit meridians at the moment they broke through to perfected foundation establishment. A look of admiration and relief flashed through the emperor's eyes as well as he nodded. A moment later, Su Zimo's aura was still rising and his spirit energy surged through his spirit meridian like a tidal wave. Is this lad going to unlock a second spirit meridian? The three great secret skills of Misty Peak truly live up to their reputation. Bang! 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 A series of sounds echoed continuously from Su Zimo's body. Indeed, his spirit energy was surging like a tidal wave with a frightening aura, as it charged at the second spirit meridian. Each time spirit energy surged, his meridians would expand. The meridians in his body were like rivers. If the initial spirit energy could only be considered as a stream, the expanded river would be a gushing river with a torrential aura. Bang! Another dull thud sounded. The second spirit meridian was unlocked and appeared. It's done! Xianyi gripped his fists tightly and exclaimed softly. The spirit energy within Su Zimo's body gradually calmed down and everyone heaved a sigh of relief. All of a sudden, an even more terrifying aura burst forth and a third spirit meridian appeared beneath his green robes. Bang! 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 The surging continued. The restraint earlier on was merely to accumulate strength. Once the accumulation was over, he would charge at the third spirit meridian with an even stronger stance. This time round even Xianyi was dumbfounded. Was he trying to unlock 3 spirit meridians in a single go? The emperor opened his mouth slightly and a look of shock flashed through his eyes. Gushi glanced over as well, her beautiful eyes filled with shock and curiosity. What sort of a spirit root did Su Zimo have? The spirit energy he cultivated was actually so pure and rich. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.